Chapter 7:13. People from the monastery? Dean was surprised. The last time the monastery sent someone to investigate the situation, they lost a person. Why would they send someone this time? Did they want peace talks like the military? Dean thought for a moment. Bring him in. Dean put away the bottle of God's marrow on the table as Noyce left. He arranged the confidential documents on the table and put a veil on Aisha's face. At this time, he sensed footsteps. His eyes penetrated through the metal door and saw Noyce leading a young man outside the square. The body temperature of the young man was relatively ordinary. He was only at the level of a hunter. But with his X-ray vision, he saw a horrifying scene. The number of bones in the young man's body was not 206 like a normal human body. Although the bones were to maintain the human form, but the bones were like scales. The bones in the hands weren't simple phalanx bones. There were small barbs on the joints of each phalanx bone. This strange structure was not something that a hunter could evolve. The man had hidden the heat of his body. Dean's eyes lit up. He would be confused by the body heat and the strength of the heartbeat. But the structure of the bones in the body couldn't be easily changed. Moreover, the difference in evolution was huge. It was likely that the young man was at the level of a pioneer. Noyce pushed the door and invited the young man to enter the hall. There was a trace of surprise in the young man's eyes when he saw Dean sitting on the throne. He smiled and stepped forward. "I'm Lucius from the Inner Wall Monastery. I'm here to visit you." Dean looked at Noyce and motioned him to step back. He didn't want to accidentally injure Lucius by activating the power system of the temple. Noyce understood and closed the door when he left the hall. The young man looked at the closed door and then looked at Dean. He sat down and crossed his legs. "I'm sure you want to ask me why I'm here. In fact, I'm forced to come. Those old men forced me to come here. I want to see if the beauty next to you is Aisha of the Dragon Clan. I also want to see what you are relying on to occupy the outer wall and dare to go against the inner wall." Dean slightly raised his eyebrows. "Are you here to inquire about information?" "I don't think so." Lucius spread his hands and said, "I don't think so either. However, the military has sent out 2 god of war, and both of them died at your hands. I'm weak, so even if I sneaked over, I wouldn't be able to find anything. So, I just came to talk to you." Dean's eyes flashed as he heard the name, War God. "What gives you the confidence to talk to me? You are more straightforward than me." Lucius was a little surprised, then he clapped his hands and said, "That's good, then I'll tell you the truth. They sent me here to gather information, but I'm not interested. I'm just here to complete a mission, just to go through the motions. They have spies in your holy see. Once they see me come in, my mission is basically completed. But I can't leave immediately, and I don't think you'll let me go so easily. So, let me stay here for a few days. As long as you don't kill me, I'll give you a big gift regarding the secrets of the monastery." Dean slightly raised his eyebrows as he felt that this person was a bit out of the norm. But he wouldn't believe his lies. The inner wall would never send a useless person to inquire about the information. He said, "I don't care about the secret you told me. You don't need to go back since you are here. I can let you live here for a lifetime." Dean didn't hide his killing intent as he spoke. Lucius smiled. "Didn't the ancient book say that the envoys aren't hurt when the 2 armies fight? It's not nice of you to do this. Tell me the truth before you die. What is your purpose in coming here?" Dean said in a cold voice. "Do you think you can fool others with your rhetoric?" Lucius sighed. "Then I'll be honest. I'm a missionary." "Missionary?" Dean was startled. It was said that the first Pope of Light was a missionary of the monastery. "Yes." Lucius sighed. "You should know about the outbreak of corpses in the inner wall. The monastery should have sent people to kill you because of your crimes. But they didn't have the time because of the corpses. They wanted to use soft methods to explore the road. So they sent me as a scapegoat to persuade you. Don't you think I'm unlucky?" Lucius looked depressed. Dean couldn't help but laugh. Dean looked at him strangely. Was this person really a weirdo? However, Dean believed his words. The monastery had sent only one person. Most of them didn't have time to take care of the situation of the outer wall. However, he felt strange that the monastery was too naive. Did they think that he would put down the butcher's knife and be obedient after a few words from a missionary? Aren't you too young to say that you are a missionary? Dean expressed his doubts. He wanted to see how Lucius would explain. Missionaries are familiar with the Bible. They have rich experience and a mature mentality. Are you a missionary? You can question my purpose, but you can't question my professionalism, Lucius said in a serious tone. Dean raised his eyebrows. He was too lazy to joke with him. He couldn't understand this person. In any case, he would kill him. It doesn't matter if you are a missionary or have other purposes. Once you are dead, everything will be gone. Dean slowly got up. In the past few days, he felt that his physique had almost reached the high-level frontiersman. His strength was more than twice as strong as when he had just broken through to the frontiersman. It was just the right time to test his strength. Anyway, there was Aisha next to him. He didn't worry unless he was killed in seconds. But he felt that the person who could kill him in seconds was probably one of the best among the pioneers, even stronger than Aisha. If such a person came, there was no need to talk nonsense with him at all. He could directly attack him. Oh, wait! Lucius was scared when he saw Dean's murderous eyes. He quickly waved his hand. If you are not interested in the secrets of the monastery, I can tell you something else. For example, the kingdom of God, the road above the pioneers, or anything else you want to know. I know more than you think. Chapter 7:14. You don't know about it. Lucius was relieved as he saw Dudian sit down again. My father was the greatest missionary of the monastery. Even the dean of the monastery had to be polite to my father. So my father had access to some of the core secrets of the monastery. All the pioneers were eager to know. My father told me about it before he died. That's how I know about it. If you don't kill me, then I can tell you what you want to know in exchange. But if you want to kill me, then I can't do anything about it. Anyway, I was sent here to be a scapegoat. I can only accept my bad luck. He continued, if you want to use the criminal law to extort a confession, then I advise you to forget it. Although I haven't received any strict training, but I have at least 10 methods of suicide that you can't stop. Dean stared at him. He felt that there were some omissions, but from the structure of the bones in his body, he knew that he was by no means a simple missionary. It's impossible for you to stay here for a few days unless you are willing to let me break your hands and feet, Dean said in a cold voice. No matter what your purpose is, I advise you to either confess or tell me everything you know before you die. Maybe then I can let you die a quick death. We are all adults. Can you stop talking about death? It's bloody. Lucas sighed and said, You are really paranoid. I have already confessed everything to you, but you still don't believe me. I can swear in the name of the light God that if there is even half a word of falsehood in my words, I will immediately go to hell and be locked in purgatory forever, never to be freed. Dean's eyes slightly moved. The monastery and the Holy Church were of the same origin. Many of the Holy Church's ways of doing things were inherited from the monastery, including their beliefs and dogmas. Even the most vicious people in the Holy Church didn't dare to swear in the name of the God of Light. Was this person really a weirdo? However, this person was hiding his strength. He was absolutely plotting something. Even if I believed you, I wouldn't let you live here. Dean raised his mechanical watch and looked at the time. I'll give you a quarter of an hour to finish what you want to say. I don't have time to continue to talk with you. If you can't satisfy me, then you won't be able to leave. I wanted to stay here for a few days and fool that old guy Moglin, but it seems like it's going to be very difficult. Lucius said bitterly, It seems that there are only 2 paths for me to choose from. Either I use my knowledge and experience as a missionary to persuade you to join our monastery, or you have some good will in your heart and let me go. Otherwise, only death awaits me. There's a third option, Dudian said. Tell me what you said before. That will inspire a little goodwill from me. Lucius shook his head. It's a long story. 15 minutes isn't enough. It's impossible for you to increase the time. My own rest time is limited. Dudien's words pierced through his mind. You can also read me the Bible or talk about the principles of your monastery. But I'm afraid it'll be a bit difficult if you want to influence me. I'm not going to say anything from the Bible. Lucius's mouth curled. I haven't read the entire Bible, let alone memorize it to deceive people. Dean was surprised as it was the first time that he heard someone talk about the Bible in front of him. Moreover, it was someone from the monastery. He had some doubts as to whether the other party was from the monastery. Was it another force disguised as the monastery? Lucius shrugged his shoulders as he saw the doubt in Dudien's eyes. Don't think too much. I'm a genuine missionary of the monastery. Even if you suspect me, you can't doubt the clothes I'm wearing. No one in the inner wall would dare to pretend to be from the monastery. That's true. After all, there are too few fools. Dudian nodded. Lucius was dumbfounded. You are right. There are fewer and fewer fools. It's not easy to deceive them. If you want to coax people into joining the monastery, you have to come up with the temptation of gold and silver. Relying on the charm of the God of Light isn't enough. Dudian looked at the strange missionary. How can you be a missionary if you don't believe in it? I'm different from other missionaries. I'm too lazy to use the God of Light to deceive people. Lucius's expression was full of disdain. If there was a God, then there wouldn't be a need for us. We could use his power to dispel all sins and make fools smart. Dudian felt that Lucius's thinking was a bit similar to the people of the same era as him, but there are many people who don't understand such a simple truth. Some people are fools and don't understand. Some people understand but pretend not to understand. Lucius sighed. People say that those who don't understand are terrible. In fact, those who don't understand but pretend not to understand are terrible. Dudian asked. Since you don't believe in God, then why did you join the monastery? Why did you become their missionary? I don't believe in God, but my father does. Lucius shook his head. Instead of talking about God, we should talk about truth and falsehood. Truth and falsehood? A serious expression suddenly appeared on Lucius' face. I feel that everything in this world doesn't differentiate between nobility and inferiority. There is only truth and falsehood. Just like your current life. Do you think it's true or false? It's not a dream. Of course it's true. Is it? The corners of Lucas' mouth curled up. Then do you think the real world is like this? What is the goal you are striving for? You should have killed a lot of people to sit in this position. Have you sacrificed so many lives just to get this right? Dudian narrowed his eyes as he stared at him but didn't answer. He saw that Lucius seemed to be chatting with him, but he wanted to use this opportunity to slowly pry open his mouth and grasp his mind step by step. Lucius chuckled as he saw that Dean didn't speak. Anyway, I have fallen into your hands. Are you afraid of being brainwashed by a mediocre preacher? Dean's eyes lit up as he nodded. All right, since you want to talk, I'll accompany you. Chapter 7:15. Lucius smiled as he saw Dean's reaction. We are adults, so there is no point in lying. Don't you think that it would be a waste of time? Yes. Dean was happy. I can only guarantee that I am telling the truth. How do I know that you are telling the truth? We might as well swear. Swear by the God of Light. Of course not. The God of Light is a fake. There is no credibility in using a fake thing as an oath. Lucius spoke bluntly without the slightest trace of the monastery's style. Let's swear on the things that we admire and respect the most. Whoever lies will lose the thing that they want the most, the wish that they want the most. How about it? Dean raised his eyebrows and looked at him for a few seconds. No problem, but you have to add 2 more. In addition to these 2, you have to swear by the name of the God of Light and the identity of the monastery. You can't violate it. I don't believe in God, but I didn't expect you to. Lucius shook his head with a smile. Fine, I'll suffer a bit. With these 2, who told me to sit lower than you? Dean was non-committal. After the 2 of them quickly swore their vows, Lucius said, As far as I know, Mr. Dew's childhood wish was to become a doctor or a priest? It seems that you have done a lot of homework. Wouldn't it be rude if I didn't know anything about you? Dean didn't pursue the matter. His information was sent to the hands of the monastery by the Holy Church when he was appointed as the 9th elder. The details of the information were more than what he knew. But after all, information was dead. Life was alive. It would never stop. He said, In that case, how did the monastery cultivate you? You want to know how the monastery allowed a person like me to exist? Lucas shrugged. Of course they relied on their relationship. I would have been kicked out if they didn't have a strong relationship. Relationship with your father? Yes. Lucas nodded slightly, seemingly unwilling to continue discussing this topic. He took the initiative to say, Mr. Dew also had a passionate heart when he was young. Why are you so heartless now? You should know that you can't shake the power of the inner wall. If you succeed, then the possibility is negligible. But if you fail, then you and the people around you will be obliterated. Even their families, wives and daughters will be implicated. Even if you don't sympathize with the ordinary people, you should sympathize with the people around you. Dean frowned. His words made him uncomfortable. He had deliberately avoided thinking about it before. After all, he wasn't 100% sure about overthrowing the inner wall. When they followed me, they were already prepared to sacrifice themselves. Dean looked at him coldly. There are many people in this world who aren't like you. You can do whatever you want. Many people want to live a better life, so they can only exchange it with their lives. What they are enjoying now is what they have risked their lives for. Lucas smiled. Do you think such an exchange is worth it? They are using their lives to exchange wealth with you. What is the difference between that and a devil's contract? Moreover, with your ability you can lead them to a good life. There is no need to rebel. What do you mean by rebellion? You are calling it rebellion. Dean quietly looked at him. You also think that rebellion is not necessary. Then why did you choose to rebel? You went against the monastery's arrangement. Isn't that a betrayal of the monastery? I didn't betray them. Lucius shook his head. If I was afraid of death and didn't come, then that would be considered a betrayal. But since I came, it can't be considered a betrayal. Moreover, what I'm doing now is also fulfilling my duty as a missionary, advising you to do good. How can this be considered a betrayal? But you are not satisfied with such an arrangement, right? Dean's eyes were deep. You mentioned true and false. In my opinion, your behavior is false. You are obviously not satisfied, but you don't dare to show it on the surface. That is hypocrisy. Lucas was startled as he didn't expect Dean to use his words to suppress him. He was silent for a few seconds. Indeed, it is hypocrisy. But hypocrisy is human nature. As long as it doesn't hurt others, then it isn't a bad thing. I never thought that hypocrisy is a bad thing, Dean said. Lucas was startled once again. He wanted to defend himself but didn't expect Dean's words to be in vain. He frowned. Hypocritical people in this world are always hateful. Our monastery borrowed the name of God of Light, but it isn't hypocritical. After all, no one can prove that God of Light is real. But at the same time, no one can prove that God of Light doesn't exist. We borrowed the name of God of Light to spread kindness, justice, and benevolence. I think it has nothing to do with hypocrisy. Dean looked indifferent. Indeed, no one can prove that there are no ghosts. The monastery isn't hypocritical. Even if it is hypocritical, it is good for everyone. People would rather like villains than hypocritical people. In the final analysis, it's not that hypocrisy is a vicious thing, but that there are too many stupid people. They can't distinguish what is true and what is false. That's why they are deceived and say that others are hypocritical. Lucius was speechless. He felt that there was something wrong with those words and retorted, "Most people are just kind, not stupid. There will always be people who treat kindness as stupidity, but kindness is kindness. If everyone is smart, then there will be more people who do bad things. But what do you think the world will be like if everyone is a villain?" Dean quietly looked at him. "I'll tell you what will happen. Politicians will tear off the mask of the people and will use tough means to suppress the voices of resistance. The treachery of businessmen will be allowed by the law. As you said, the world is divided into true and false. The true is more terrible than the false." He didn't give Lucius a chance to interrupt and said, "If two people are both very dirty, and one of them is wearing clothes to cover himself, the other is naked and allows others to see his body. Knowing that he is dirty, people will stay away from him to protect themselves. It seems that the cute part of villains is to warn others to avoid danger. That's why people hate hypocrisy. However, if all the people who are wearing clothes take off their clothes and reveal their dirty bodies, what will happen then? You will find that most of the people on the street are naked. They are all very dirty, and those who are truly kind and honest are very few. What will happen at this time? There is only one result. All the people who are naked will bully the few. They will enslave the good and honest people. They won't hide their ugliness and will openly break the law. Of course, at that time there will be no law because there are too many bad people. They will make the law. At that time, killing is not a crime, raping is not a crime, and everyone will openly release their true nature. At that time, do you still think that true villains are cute?" Lucas was stunned and speechless. He said after a while, "What you said is too extreme. It is impossible to happen." "It is impossible," Dudian nodded, "because everyone is hypocritical. Hypocrisy is derogatory. It refers to hypocrisy and restraining one's nature. Isn't it hypocritical? If it is, then know how to restrain one's instincts and nature. In other words, the first step of being a person is to start from hypocrisy." Chapter 7:16. Lucius was dumbfounded. Dean's words had a great impact on him. Although it sounded like a crooked logic, but he couldn't find any mistakes to refute. He sobered up after a while and immediately retorted, "You said that because you are now the ruler of the outer wall, naturally you will be praised as a hypocrite." Dean shook his head. "I'm not praising you. It's just my personal opinion. Although I have said so much, I don't think that hypocritical people are better than real villains. In fact, for me, I treat both kinds of people the same. I don't think which one is more annoying, because I have the insight to see through the hypocrisy of the hypocrite in front of me. But if the villain is in front of me, I have the power to suppress his evil." Lucius coldly said, "No matter which of these two types of people, they are like parasites. According to you, hypocritical people are better for the security of the giant wall than real villains. At least people know how to protect their face and won't kill on the street. But such people are greedy and covert. If they are officials, then they will breed corruption. If they are friends, then they will stab people in the back. They are simply beasts in human skin." "Yes. That's why I need a pair of eyes," Dudian indifferently said. "If you are wrong and blame others for deceiving you, then you deserve it." Lucius shook his head. "Who can be like you and be on guard against everyone? Moreover, people's hearts are complex. It's difficult to see a person, especially for a good person." "That's not kindness. It's laziness," Dean said. "The world is fair. The less you use your brain, the more you will suffer." Lucas shook his head slightly and said, "If everyone knew how to restrain their nature and not harm others, to not be true villains or hypocrites, to be as pure as newborn babies, Then that would be the best thing and the most ideal state of being a human. Dean looked at him. He felt that Lucius was about to distinguish the difference between a hypocrite and a true gentleman. Dean had to thank the treasures left by the ancestors of China. Half of the hypocrisy he talked about was to deliberately ignore the etiquette part in order to confuse Lucius. As Lucius said, everyone was hypocritical. Most people hated hypocrisy because it referred to using hypocrisy to do evil. The other kind of hypocrisy was called etiquette. There was a world of difference between the two. In short, the most important thing to learn in the process of being a person was kindness and hypocrisy. I can't be either, and I can't be a pure person either. Dean refuted Lucius's words. Purity means blankness. Babies can't be regarded as people. What's the difference if you live for many years and yearn to be a baby? Lucius didn't expect that Dean would refute such a thing. A painter once told me that a person is born as a piece of white paper. The years have smeared paint on it. That's why people will get old and die, because the paper has been smeared with paint. It's because the paper has been smeared with paint that it can't be painted anymore. That's why we have to die. Death is the greatest punishment that God can give to life. It is a judgment and at the same time a warning. The painting of life wouldn't be so bad and ugly if people could live a bit easier and kinder. Dean indifferently said, Birth, old age, sickness and death is the punishment of God. Then survival is the struggle between man and God. According to you, if you don't have so many distracting thoughts and live a bit easier, then your life won't be smeared so quickly. In my opinion, it's the opposite. You are living a very casual life. You are giving your life to God to decide. You will live as long as God allows you to live. And those who think too much, those who smear too much, just want to live a better life, live a more exciting life. They are fighting, but you are resigned to your fate, hanging your head under the blade of God, letting Him cut you down. Lucius was stunned. He didn't expect Dean to refute this kind of thing. He couldn't help but ask, Do you think that kindness is a mistake? If Dean admitted it, he would feel ridiculous, because this was the root of his belief, and it couldn't be shaken. At the same time, it meant that he could ignore Dean's previous words as a fallacy. Dean didn't answer him but asked, What is kindness? Lucius was startled by this question, but he quickly recovered and said, I think even a 3-year-old knows this question. Who told a 3-year-old child? Dean asked again. Lucius's expression changed slightly as he realized that the answer to this question wasn't so simple. He quickly thought for a moment before replying, Our monastery has always leaned towards the good side. Of course, although we have done bad things and killed people, you must know that the monastery is a whole with countless people. Naturally, the quality of our people varies. However, the purpose of our monastery is good. This is indisputable. Even I have to admit it. Lucius's words were very pertinent and very certain. Dean nodded. In this respect, Lucius was much better than the other people in the monastery. At least he didn't blindly say things that he didn't believe in. Moreover, he wouldn't blindly defend the monastery. But this didn't win Lucius's favor and lowered his vigilance. The so-called kindness is determined by morality. Dean continued, The moral definition of good is good. So, who is going to make the moral definition? What is the role of morality? Let me tell you, the function of morality is to manage the places that cannot be controlled by the fist. Every ruler can use his sword to subdue every citizen in his territory, but he can't suppress every evildoer. At this time, morality is needed to restrain them. Therefore, the function of morality is obvious. It is used to maintain the development of mankind. If everyone is kind, then the world will be peaceful. Only peace can lead to good management and development. However, long-term peace will lead to comfort and decline. Therefore, war is necessary. Although everyone hates war, those who hate it are only those who can't benefit from war, because war will bring them death. If war only brings death to others, but benefits to them, then they won't hate it. Dean continued. Moreover, not everyone will abide by the restrictions of morality. The ancients said that everyday morality is the dogma, and you have to reflect on your own mistake. It's like a person walking in the wrong direction. However, this direction is set by others, not by you. The path you walk is also the path that others want you to walk, because everyone walks the same path. There are rules and regulations, and only then will it be good for everyone. As for those who like to wander around, they follow their instincts and run around blindly. That's why they bump into others and hurt law-abiding citizens. Lucius's face turned ugly. Dean didn't answer his question but analyzed the problem more deeply. Lucius felt a burst of pressure. Although the faith in his heart hadn't shaken, but he had to admit that the youth in front of him was the most terrible person he had met in more than 20 years. He couldn't be compared to the other preachers in the monastery who could only read the Bible. He had won the debate with the preachers and felt that he had seen the world thoroughly enough. But Dean's words had elevated his thinking to another angle, the ruler's point of view. Everyone would look at the problem from their own habitual point of view. A suspicious person would always have a skeptical attitude. A businessman would always look at the problem from the perspective of interest. Lucius used to look at the problem from the philosophical point of view of good and evil. But Dean's thinking was from the perspective of survival and destruction of mankind. It was no longer a matter of pure interests or good and evil, but the trend of the entire human activities. Chapter 7:17. Dean hit the iron while it was hot as he saw Lucius remain silent. You said that the monastery advises people to be good. But what is good? I think that there are two kinds of good. One is the good of mortals. It is the good of mortals. You said that there is nothing wrong with being good. Why is it that there is nothing wrong with being good? Because the law only punishes the wicked and not the good. This kind of good refers to a pure heart, tolerance, willingness to help others and self-sacrifice. If it is an ordinary civilian, then he is a good citizen. He won't bring damage to the surrounding environment and others. We are happy to see that. But will the military abide by such good? If they abide by it, then they won't force the civilians to fight. Will the magistrate abide by such good? If they abide by it, then they should forgive all the people who made mistakes. After all, only when others make mistakes will they use forgiveness. Forgiveness is also a kind of good. Obviously, they didn't do that. They will punish evil people. Killing an extremely evil person is equivalent to saving countless good people. This is the second kind of good that I'm talking about. Good that looks at the big picture. Some people like to call it great good. Dean continued. Killing people is bad, but killing bad people is good. The difference between the two lies in their role. Killing people is to destroy the system. Killing bad people is to maintain the system. In other words, no matter what kind of good it is, the purpose is to maintain the overall situation of the system. There is nothing wrong with being good. Because everyone is good, then there will be peace, and there will be fewer sacrifices. It is good for everyone. But for those who don't want to abide by the rules, this kind of good is evil. It is the rope that binds them. Lucius listened to Dean's words, but it didn't disturb his thoughts. He looked at Dean. According to you, what you have done is a good deed? Dean shook his head. In your opinion, I have sacrificed the lives of others to satisfy my own selfish desires. But you should see that I have sacrificed a lot of people, but I have brought a better life to others. The material in this world is limited. It is like a scale. When one end decreases, then the other will naturally increase. Lucius sneered and said, It's good that you know. This world must have rules, and we must abide by them. Just like a carriage moving forward, this is the direction of humanity. Only by following this path can we continue moving forward. If someone doesn't abide by the rules, then the carriage will stop moving forward. Therefore, obeying the rules and morals is good. Dean's eyes were deep. The world naturally needs rules. But since we have to abide by the rules, then why should we abide by other people's rules and not our own rules? Our human society has always been modeled after an ant colony. There can only be one commander-in-chief who can command everyone. Everyone is like ants listening to the orders of the queen ant, obeying the orders of the ruler. This kind of society can bring about highly efficient development. It's like a factory. Everyone just needs to complete their own tasks in their respective positions. But there is a drawback. If the ruler makes a mistake, then the entire race will be beyond redemption. Fortunately, we humans are smarter than ants. Although we are like ants and don't dare to disobey the queen, but we have independent will. We don't have to obey unconditionally like puppets. Every human ruler will face the situation of being scrutinized by all the civilians. Although the civilians are stupid, but once the ruler makes a mistake, then there will be wars, rebellions and rebellions. To put it bluntly, human rulers don't have the absolute ability to rule. They are the incarnation of the collective consciousness of the civilians. If the incarnation violates the collective will of the civilians, then it will be overthrown by everyone. There is an old saying that water can carry a boat, but it can also overturn it. Dean indifferently said, "You think that I'm a rebel. It shows that the current ruler is in the wrong direction. There needs to be a new person to replace him." "You want to replace the ruler of the wall?" Lucas stared at Dean in disbelief. He thought that Dean's ambition was to occupy the outer wall. He didn't expect that Dean wanted to replace Aristotle. It was simply a fantasy. Why not? Dean looked at him. How did the first wall master come about? How did the second wall master come about? Did they not use their brains and think that they were born to be the ruler? Lucas was startled. After a while he said, "They are determined by the kingdom of God. If you want to be the ruler, then you have to pass through the kingdom of God first. What you said is just an excuse for your rebellion. In the end, you are just satisfying your own selfish desires." Dean looked at him. "Since you don't want to listen, then let me ask you. You said that the monastery spread kindness and fairness. Do you think that the monastery has achieved it?" Lucas didn't think. "Of course," Dean indifferently said. "If they have achieved it, then why are you here? If they are kind, then why didn't they give me the outer wall? Why would they take it back? They didn't even hesitate to sacrifice your life. They even wanted to fight me. If I stubbornly resisted, then the entire military would die. Do you think they would dare to look at such casualties?" Lucas was dumbfounded. He didn't expect Dean to bite back. He gritted his teeth. "I said that this is the rule. You took away the outer wall without authorization. That is against the rules. Does kindness have to kneel in front of the rules?" Dean looked at him. "I'll ask you again. Do you believe that it is fair?" Lucius's expression changed. He knew that this was an extremely controversial issue. He said, "I know that some people will think that this is unfair. For example, those who are born lowly and those who are born nobles. This is unfair. However, this is what God has decreed. He is a commoner in this life, and he must have been an extremely evil person in his previous life. In this life, he is paying for his sins. And we, the mystic sect, uphold justice. Although life is not fair, if you commit a crime, you will receive the same sentence. Isn't that fair?" Dean indifferently said, "I think that the world is very fair. It is the things that you are trying to do that are creating unfairness." Lucius was stunned as Dean's words were beyond his expectations. "What do you mean? The rich have 24 hours in a day and the poor have 24 hours in a day. Isn't that fair?" Dean slowly said, "Whether it is the poor, the rich, or the nobles, everyone will think that it is unfair. Isn't that a kind of fairness? There are differences in this world, but the mystic sect strives to make people believe in fairness. This is the greatest injustice to those who listen to you." Dean looked at him. "If this isn't creating unfairness, then what is it?" Lucas was stunned. He didn't know how to refute. He felt that every word that Dean said was completely different from the people he had been in contact with. It was as if he was chatting with someone from another world. He didn't realize that a new door had been opened in his heart. He slowly opened his mouth after a long time. In any case, your actions have destroyed the families of many innocent people. They didn't provoke you nor did they hurt you. But you took the initiative to hurt them. This is your sin. Dee shook his head slightly and said, "The world is a game, and all living beings are chess pieces. No matter if you are a pawn, a queen, or a king, you all have the possibility of being killed. You can choose to stop moving forward, but it doesn't mean that you are innocent. Once your side loses, the entire game is useless. That's why most of us desperately want to live a better life. Those who pursue power in the beginning only want to make themselves safer. It's just that after a long time, they enjoy the feeling of controlling the safety of others." Chapter 7:18. The rules of the Bureau, Lucius muttered to himself. There was a trace of sluggishness in his eyes. Although he didn't want to admit Dean's words, but Dean had made him see a bigger world. The original beliefs in his heart had rushed to the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't stand on his feet, because he couldn't fully believe it. Dean saw the change in Lucius's expression. He knew that he had succeeded in instilling the ideas into Lucius's mind. After all, the world described by the monastery was too beautiful to be true. However, Lucius was telling a bloody world. Secondly, he believed that even if Lucas was of noble status, his life would not be smooth sailing. There would only be beauty. Your monastery uses the name of God to confuse civilians. You claim to be the spokesperson of God, but you can't prove the existence of God. Dean continued, "They are the subordinates of the Wall Lord. If the Wall Lord does bad things, then they are accomplices, and you are also an accomplice." "Enough!" Lucius interrupted Dean's words. He took a deep breath and calmed down. His expression was solemn. "I admit that I lost this time. Even if I win the debate, you won't be easily persuaded by me. However, I won't let this matter go. I will come back again." Through all the previous words of Dean, he had seen that this teenager was completely different from other teenagers. He was even more terrible than some of the scheming and ambitious people. His beliefs were firm, and he had his own set of thinking, which was very thorough. Unless he could refute the other's thinking and completely destroy him, it was impossible to persuade him to surrender. "See you later." After saying this, Lucas suddenly stood up and swayed slightly like a hurricane. With a bang, the door of the temple was suddenly pushed open. A cool breeze swept up Lucas' body and quickly disappeared outside the square. Dean was startled. He didn't get electrocuted? He realized that the situation wasn't right when Lucius admitted defeat. He activated the power system of the temple, but the situation was unexpected. Lucius didn't get electrocuted. Could it be that he didn't use his own hands to open the door? Or could it be that his magic marks were resistant to electricity? He ran so fast. Dean narrowed his eyes as he looked at Lucius, who disappeared at the end of the square. Lucius's physique was definitely at the pioneer level. He was even stronger than Hero and Ronan. Moreover, he knew that Dean's plan was ruined. Lucius didn't give Dean a chance to capture him. He even avoided the power system of the temple. How did he know that there was electricity in the temple? Electricity shouldn't exist in the inner wall, so it could only be unintentional. Or was he cautious enough to think that I would put poison on the door? So he didn't touch the door but used something else to open it? Dean frowned as he was puzzled. He looked down at his watch. It was almost a quarter of an hour. He sighed. He had wasted so much time. However, it couldn't be considered a waste. He believed that he had planted a seed in this person's heart that he might be able to use in the future. "Elder, do you think that Lucius will be able to persuade that person? The other party has seized the control of the outer wall and put the entire outer wall in his pocket. Such a person is cruel and cunning. I'm afraid that it won't be easy for him to listen to us missionaries." A 60-year-old man in a red robe stood in front of Emoglan as he spoke. "Don't you think that Lucius will be able to persuade that person?" His face was full of worry. "I hope nothing bad will happen to the child." His father had gone deep into the danger zone to persuade a wicked bastard. The result was that he lost his life. Emoglan smiled and said, "You don't have to worry. This child is different from the rest of you. After his father's death, although there is no one to control him, his ability to persuade others is not inferior to that of an ordinary missionary. Moreover, I sent him there because he has seen the darkness with his own eyes. Therefore, he knows better than most missionaries what to say to these arrogant, evil followers. It's difficult to persuade these vicious people by explaining the story of the Bible. Although the glory of God is great, but how can the people who have fallen into the darkness see the light of God? You know that even a glimmer of light is very dazzling for the people in the darkness. They don't want to open their eyes to see it." The red-robed old man was startled. He smiled bitterly and said, "That's true. It's not that we missionaries are incompetent, but that too many people have abandoned their belief. No matter what we say, they won't listen, and they won't listen." Moglen smiled and said, "We'll just sit and wait for his good news. I hope he will come back safely." The old man was worried. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. Clang! Dean injected the last tube of God's marrow into his arm. He felt the surging power in his body, still not enough. Now that he had consumed all the God's marrows, his physique had advanced from the primary limitless expert level to the advanced limitless expert level. After entering the devil realm, his posture had changed further. He was closer to Splitter, but he looked more ferocious than Splitter. "It seems that I have to go to the inner wall again," Dean pondered. "I should be able to gather enough God's marrow to evolve into a pioneer after looting the Monster Institute. I don't know if my fighting strength will be comparable to Aisha after I become a pioneer. Aisha's fighting strength should be in the top 10 of the inner wall." Dean felt a trace of pressure in his heart. He hoped that his magic marks would be able to evolve into a pioneer. Then he would be able to surpass ordinary pioneers. Maybe even surpass Aisha, who had the bloodline power of the witch family. He had asked Poland. The strongest people in the inner wall were pioneers. There was no existence above the pioneers. Although Lucius didn't tell him about the problem, he asked Poland afterwards and got the answer from him. The stage above the pioneer was called Abyss Walker. There was no one at this level in the entire giant wall. It was because the evolution from pioneer to Abyss Walker required a special energy which wasn't available in the giant wall. Chapter 719. Although Poland was an ordinary person, but because he was a doctor from the Monster Research Institute, he had a lot of information about the pioneers. Dean learned from him that pioneers were divided into 3 levels. They were Outer Wasteland, Inner Wasteland, and Dominator. The power gap between each level was huge. It was no less than the difference between limiters and pioneers. Previously Dean had captured Hero and Ronan. They were the best of the pioneers in the Outer Wasteland. They could easily defeat ordinary pioneers. As for the pioneers of the Hunter family like Aisha, who had the bloodline power, they would have the power of the Inner Wasteland. They could go deep into the Red Wasteland to save their lives. Dean also learned that the bloodline power of the Hunter family could be awakened 7 times. Once the 7th awakening was completed, the power would surpass the Dominator level, and they would have the power of the Abyss level. However, the giant wall of Sylvia had never had a pioneer who had awakened 7 times. The highest level of awakening was the ancestors of the Dragon Clan and the Rock Clan. The 6th awakening was unparalleled. They were born in the same era. It was under their leadership that the 3 major hunter families were able to develop the wasteland on a large scale. The original wasteland was very close to the giant wall. The distance was less than 100 miles. Every night the residents of the giant wall could hear the ferocious roars and the roars of unknown creatures outside the giant wall. It was a dark and trembling era. Under the leadership of the two gifted ancestors of the hunter family, the wasteland outside the giant wall had been cleaned up. Now it was the hunters' activity area. There were only some small monsters that hadn't been cleaned up. Dean asked Poland where the hunter family came from, but Poland didn't know anything about it. He only said that it was one of the top secret. Even with his authority, he couldn't know the secrets of the hunter family. Regarding the power of the Wall Lord, Poland also knew nothing. He only knew that every time the Wall Lord was appointed by the Kingdom of God, no one in the military headquarters opposed it. From this point alone, it can be seen that in addition to the blessing of the Kingdom of God, the Wall Lord's own power is not simple. Dean got more information from Poland's mouth than from Gwyneth. In addition to the 10 military gods, there were many ordinary pioneers. Above the 10 military gods there were 3 supreme commanders. Each of them was in existence in the inner wasteland. They were comparable to Aisha's status and power. One must know that Aisha was the saint of the Dragon Clan. She received the best resources from the Dragon Clan. Moreover, she had a strange bloodline. She could stimulate the power of her bloodline. She could be regarded as one of the best masters in the entire Dragon Clan. But even so, she could only be on the same level as the 3 commanders of the military. The monsters of the abyss have never appeared in the inner wall. The strongest one was the ancestor of the hunter family who had awakened the 6th degree. They were the strongest under the abyss. Dean had a new understanding of the power of the inner wall. If the 5th degree of bloodline awakening is achieved, then the pioneer will have the power to fight with the pioneer of the dominator level. If the 6th degree of bloodline awakening is achieved, then the pioneer will be stronger than the general dominator. But the pioneers are different from the limiters. They can't rely on the gods' marrows to evolve. There are also requirements for the magic marks. From the information revealed by Poland, Dean knew that the other role of magic marks was not only to bring more abilities but also to limit the limits of growth. Generally, rare magic marks could only enhance one's physique to the level of an ordinary pioneer. Only rare magic marks could enhance one's strength to the level of the 10 military gods in the outer wasteland. If one wanted to enter the inner wasteland, one must have legendary magic marks. In addition, Dean also learned an amazing news. Although the atlas came from the Monster Research Institute in the inner wall, but it wasn't determined by the institute. It came from the Kingdom of God. Every time the envoys from the Kingdom of God came, they would bring a list of the latest monster illustrated books. However, because of the long interval between the envoys from the Kingdom of God, they would only come once in 10 or 5 years. Moreover, the books provided by the Kingdom of God didn't cover all the magic marks. Therefore, the Monster Research Institute would record the information of the newly mutated monsters outside the giant wall. After comparing all aspects of the data in the atlas, they would be divided into their own atlas. Therefore, the 8 legendary monsters were named by the Kingdom of God. Many of the rare monsters were also named by the Kingdom of God. There were even some rare monsters recorded in the atlas that people had never seen before. At least they didn't exist in this area. However, the number of such monsters was very small, so no one paid attention to them. After knowing this, Dean knew why he hadn't seen the first legendary monster in the giant wall of Sylvia, the Dream Breeder. Perhaps this legendary magic mark didn't live in this area. However, what made him even more puzzled was that the highest recorded in the magical creature encyclopedia provided by the God Kingdom was only a legendary monster. Especially the number 1 monster, the Dream Breeder. According to the God Kingdom's version of the magical creature encyclopedia provided by Poland, the hunting level was 182. This was almost an unimaginable hunting level system. No wonder the atlas published by the Monster Research Institute in the outer wall recorded the legendary monster's hunting level as ? There was no specific description of the hunting level. After all, a hunting level of 182 was really a bit frightening and could even cause unnecessary panic among the hunters. But did this mean that the Dream Breeder was the strongest monster on this planet? Dean couldn't judge because this hunting level was already an astronomical number for him. Just a fraction of the legendary monster's hunting level of 82 was enough to make most of the pioneers in the outer wilderness have a headache or even lose their lives. However, after knowing the hunting level of the Dream Breeder, he did not find it strange that this fellow was ranked first among the legendary monsters. It was indeed shocking, and he could not imagine what kind of power this was, and what kind of terrifying disaster it could cause. It was estimated that even people who wanted to get the magic mark of the Dream Breeder would flinch after seeing such a hunting level. My magic marks are legendary level. God's marrows are enough for me to evolve into an inner Baron level powerhouse. I would be able to reach the level of the 3 supreme commanders of the inner wall. However, the amount of God's marrows needed to evolve from outer Baron level to inner Baron level is like a river. Even the military of the inner wall has only trained 3 supreme commanders for so many years. The top 10 military gods can only be regarded as the best of the outer Baron level. Most of them rely on their hard work and combat experience to get to that level. Dean felt a trace of pressure. In the current situation, even if he looted another monster research institute, he could only reach the level of pioneer. He couldn't directly rely on robbing the Monster Research Institute to evolve to the inner wilderness level. Dean's heart was filled with regret, but he wasn't too disappointed. In his heart's plan to reach the level of pioneer was already good. After all, overthrowing the inner wall really relied on wisdom. Becoming a pioneer had already met the requirements of his plan. A few days later, Dean was ready to set off to the inner wall to loot the Monster Research Institute again. Although he didn't go down the mountain, but he had a relatively clear understanding of the situation of the inner wall. As he expected, the corpses wouldn't be so quickly pacified. The forces of the inner wall were in a mess. Although the military had 10 military gods and 3 commanders, each of them was as strong as a god and could easily kill all the undead. But in the process of cleaning up the corpses, they encountered heavy resistance. Among the infected, there were many nobles and wealthy squires. Some of them could not bear to see their loved ones killed just like that. There were even nobles who accused the military of barbaric actions, believing that the military should find the cause of the disease and treat them instead of blindly killing the innocent. Such a situation was in line with Dean's guess. Although the fist was fierce, but what could it do to the secular world? After all, this wasn't a simple and crude world where the fist was supreme. The social form was extremely complex. The situation of the inner wall and the outer wall was no different. The aristocratic status brought the class system. It also led to the phenomenon that the strong would listen to the weak's orders. Just like the hunters in the outer wall, they received meager wealth from the consortiums and used their lives to fight outside the giant wall. The aristocrats in the consortiums didn't go out but enjoyed a steady flow of money into their pockets. This was a wonderful cycle of suppression. The pseudo-aristocrats in the outer wall could suppress the hunters because there was a magistrate to maintain order and protect the aristocrat. The same was true in the inner wall. Even the experts of the military were subject to the aristocrats because the nobles of the inner wall were given titles by the wall lords. "Master, be careful on the road." Noyce was worried as he saw Dean go deeper into the inner wall. Dean patted his shoulder. "Don't worry. I'll be back soon." He saw the giant eagle that was tied to the square. It had been imprisoned here for the past few days. Fortunately, Dean had asked Noyce to bring a few live cows for it to eat and drink. It didn't fly away because of hunger. Otherwise the chains under its feet wouldn't be enough to tie the giant eagle. Dean couldn't help but think of the 2 military gods in the dungeon. He looked at Noyce. "How are they?" "I've served them every day according to your orders." Their injuries haven't healed yet. Noyce knew who Dean was referring to. Dean nodded. Remember to check their tendons every day. Replace the piercing nails. Don't let their injuries heal. Yes, master. Noyce nodded. Dean didn't say much. He carried the giant sword on his back as he looked at the sunset. He held Aisha and flew towards the inner wall. He didn't need to hide his wings as it wasn't a secret anymore. While his physique had been greatly enhanced, his wings had also recovered. His broken wings had healed, making him look like a demon. His thin and black wings did not have a single feather, and they did not look like the wings of a demon dragon warrior. Instead, they looked like two pitch-black giant blades. They were flapping at an extremely high frequency like an insect. Rather than saying they were flapping, it would be more accurate to say that they were trembling. Dean came to the giant wall. He saw two people wearing black robes sitting on the giant wall. He wasn't surprised because these two people were the ones who were responsible for the intelligence of the spies in the inner wall. They were the ones who had followed Glenn into the inner wall to poison the monsters. Speaker. Both of them were sitting on the ground and chatting. They were leaning against the edge of the giant wall leisurely and relaxed. When they saw Dean, who suddenly landed, they were shocked and hurriedly stood up. Cold sweat broke out on their foreheads. Dean landed and put away his wings. I don't care if you rest or not, but don't let the giant wall patroller see you. The giant wall patroller was the first person he saw when he sneaked into the inner wall. He knew from Poland that there were patrollers on the giant wall. They were responsible for the safety of the giant wall. They were responsible for the safety of the giant wall. They were responsible for preventing the monsters from climbing the giant wall. However, the number of patrollers were not fixed and the time was not fixed. The main patrolling range was the giant wall of the inner wall. They rarely came to the giant wall of the outer wall. After all, the area outside the giant wall had been cleared by the pioneers. Large monsters were almost extinct. Only some small monsters had almost no possibility to climb over the giant wall. Yes, Speaker, we won't dare to do it again. Both of them replied in a nervous tone. Although they were notorious killers in the outer wall, but they couldn't help but tremble in front of Dean. They knew how high the status and power of this teenager was. Dean didn't say much as he led Aisha along the giant wall. Both of them saw Dean's action. Speaker, are you going to the inner wall? Do you want us to accompany you? No, do your part. Dean replied without looking back. Dean saw the side wall of the inner wall after walking for thousands of meters. The number of patrolling soldiers was the same as before. This was a good sign for him. It meant that the inner wall didn't suspect him of the poisoning. Dean went more than 10 miles into the inner wall. He didn't see the giant wall patrollers. He spread his wings and held Aisha as he landed in the inner wall. After landing, he shook the bell to let Aisha follow him. Then he took her and ran forward at full speed. This time, he chose another route. It was another city. A few hours later, he followed the wilderness and arrived in front of the city. Looking into the distance, he saw that there was no one guarding the giant wood fortress outside the city. It was filled with the stench of decay and fresh blood. It was disgusting. He used his X-ray vision to look around. There was no living person but some undeads. He felt relieved and went into the fortress with Aisha. The undeads in the fortress saw Dean and Aisha and immediately roared and rushed over. Chapter 720. The once bustling street was now deserted. There were overturned stalls and overturned carriages. Broken limbs could be seen everywhere on the side of the road. Some of these corpses were children's skeletons. It was like a purgatory making people sigh. Dudyen's footsteps were silent all the way. He was like a ghost floating in the ruins. The same was true for Aisha. Although she had no consciousness, the fighting instinct engraved in her bones was still memorized by her body. She walked silently. The two of them, one in front and one behind, swept through the street like a shadow. The night shrouded over the city. There was no spark or laughter, only one or two roars of corpses and screams from time to time in the distance. In history, there was a general who killed hundreds of thousands of prisoners of war. He was famous throughout the ages. I don't know how many people will despise me for this sin. Dean lifted his feet and stepped over the messy corpses on the ground. He whispered to himself as if he was talking to Aisha and himself. After that, he faintly smiled, a bit self-deprecating. It seemed that every time he was alone with Aisha, he would be more sentimental and have human emotions. Passing through half of the city, Dean gradually approached the Monster Research Institute on the map. At this time, he suddenly noticed a corner of the street in front of him. There were two faint figures, one big and one small, hiding in the alley. He was surprised. He didn't see half a living person along the way. He didn't expect that there would be people here. He didn't change his route and continued to walk forward. He immediately saw that the two people hiding in the alley were an old man and a little girl of 7 or 8 years old. They were wearing thick linen clothes. At first glance, he knew they were poor civilians. The old man also noticed Dean and Aisha. At first, he was scared when he saw them. He thought that two undeads were quietly approaching. But with the weak moonlight, he quickly saw the appearance of Dean and Aisha. Their skin color was not as pale as the undead's, nor were their blue eyes ferocious. He was relieved. He waved to Dean and pointed to the corner in front of him. Dean didn't intend to pay attention to the two, but he noticed the old man's movement. He looked in the direction of the old man's finger and saw 4 or 5 undeads wandering in the corner of the street in front of him. Since he saw the goodwill of the old man, Dean didn't continue to be blind. He was ready to clean up the undead. Suddenly, the little girl, who was held by the old man, sneaked over and pulled Dean's hand. She made a shushing gesture with 2 fingers and grabbed Aisha's hand with the other hand. It seemed that she wanted to pull her into the alley. Aisha was covered by the little girl. Her face was expressionless, but her pure black eyes slightly moved. There seemed to be evil killing intent oozing out. Dean didn't expect the little girl to be so bold. He didn't resist. He took Aisha and went back to the alley with her. The old man's anxious face was obviously relieved when he saw the little girl return. He didn't hold the little girl, which caused her to run out by herself. He was almost scared to death. Now that she returned safely, he immediately grabbed her firmly and gave her a reproachful look. But thinking that there were outsiders, he couldn't be too obvious. He looked up at Dean and Aisha. Dean whispered to the old man, "Why didn't you stay in the house? Why did you come out? There are undeads around here." The old man was scared when he heard Dean's words. He immediately looked into the alley and saw that the undeads didn't notice them. He lowered his voice and said to Dean, "We have no food at home. If we don't come out to find food, we will starve to death. Are you also going to Baron Angelo's castle to take refuge? If you want, we can go together." He saw that Dean and Aisha were very young and strong. If they were in danger, they might be able to help them. Dean knew the old man's thoughts. He asked, "Is there an army in Baron Angelo's castle?" It was rare to meet the victims of the inner wall, so he could understand the situation here. "You don't know?" The old man was surprised. He looked at Dean and Aisha. He saw the giant sword on Dean's back. His eyes lit up. "There are knights stationed in Baron Angelo's castle. The infected can't get close to it. Many people have taken refuge there. If we can get there, then we will be completely safe." Dean nodded thoughtfully. It seemed that civilians, nobles and monasteries were the scourge of corpses in the inner wall. They had enough power to protect themselves. He asked, "Did the army enter the city to clean up the undeads?" The old man felt that the question was strange but still whispered, "The army came several times but only took away a small number of people. It is said that the army will come soon." Dean understood. It seemed that the army had temporarily abandoned the civilians. Just like what he had seen last time, they had prioritized the protection of the nobles. Perhaps for the military, Once the nobles were selected from the corpses, they would be able to clean up the corpses. As for the civilians, it would depend on their luck. I still have things to do. Goodbye. Dean no longer stayed and was ready to leave. The old man was startled. Big brother, don't go. Those people will eat you. At this time, Dean's wrist was pulled by the little girl. He looked down and saw that the little girl was not beautiful. Her face was dirty, but she anxiously pulled him. If you go out, you will be eaten by them. You should go with us. As long as we reach the Baron, we will be safe. Seeing this, the old man hurriedly echoed, Yes, yes, you should come with us. Dean looked at the old man. He knew that the old man wanted to use him to protect them. But the little girl obviously didn't see it. He raised his hand and touched the little girl's head. There was no trace of impurities in her eyes. He sighed, Poor child. The old man quickly said, The child's parents went out to find food a few days ago. They didn't come back. Now the child is alone. Dean shook his head and interrupted him. He took out half a bottle of undead's powder and gave it to the old man. Smear this on your body. These monsters won't chase you. As for the ones in front, I will solve them for you. Take the opportunity to leave. The old man was startled. He held the small bottle in his hand. He was puzzled. Dean took Aisha out of the alley and strode towards the undeads at the corner. The undeads felt Aisha's scent as they got closer. The ferocious expression on their faces suddenly disappeared. They shivered and saliva flowed out of their mouths full of sharp teeth. Dean grabbed the handle of the knife and swung it around. The heads of the undeads were all cut off. He walked straight without looking back. The old man and the little girl were stunned. They reacted after Dean left. The old man immediately opened the small bottle, poured out the powder and smeared it on his body. Then he took the little girl and carefully walked along the street. Dean walked to the front of the woods. The Monster Institute was in front of him. He looked back at the corner of the street. The old man and the little girl had gone far away. His eyes flashed slightly. He said to Aisha, I have harmed a lot of people like them. Do you think it is hypocritical of me to save them because of sympathy? Sure enough, it is difficult for people to control the stimulation brought by the senses. Visual touch can control emotions. Aisha was silent. It seemed that she acquiesced. Dean shook his head slightly and no longer looked at them. He slowly went deeper into the woods. The moonlight couldn't shine into the woods. It was dark inside. But with Dean's night vision, everything was as bright as day. He pinched the snakes and insects that ambushed him to death. Soon he walked out of the woods. He saw a small hill in front of him. There was a low building on it. It was the Monster Institute. The structure of this Monster Institute was the same as the one in Carmen City. In Dean's eyes, there were 9 floors of underground research under the hill. There was no activity on the 9th floor. There were only some items. It seemed to be a storage place. The 9th floor was too deep and the ground was too humid. It was easy to effect the experiment. This time, Dean found that the range of his eyes was obviously much larger than before. He could see things more clearly. His confidence suddenly increased a bit. He raised his hand to hold the knife. To ensure that there was no mistake, he directly stimulated the demon's body. The knife melted and covered his whole body like a living black mucus. Soon, his appearance turned into a ferocious humanoid beast. His arms were elongated and turned into a sickle. Whoosh! His figure suddenly flashed. The leaves on the ground splashed up. A breeze blew through the leaves, causing them to sway slightly. There were 8 Lemeters stationed in the low building. The defense intensity was the same as that of the Monster Institute in Carmen City. Dean approached quickly and instantly broke into an open window. The young man standing by the window was talking to his companions. He didn't notice Dean at all. When Dean jumped into the window, he suddenly became alert. When he was about to turn his head, a cold light flashed. His movements suddenly froze and then his head slid down. After killing one person in an instant, Dean did not stop and immediately rushed to the person who was chatting with the youth. It was a beautiful woman wearing armor with a curvaceous figure. After a moment of shock, she quickly reacted and hurriedly retreated, but Dean was as fast as a tiger. Her back hit the wall, and the next moment, she saw the terrifying figure in front of her completely occupied her eyes. Puff! Dean's arm slashed and turned to another place. He didn't look back to see the result. When he attacked, he clearly saw the position of the 8 people. All the movements and sequence of the attacks were planned. When he attacked the third person, the others had already reacted. They immediately shouted in anger and stimulated the demon's body to surround Dean. Too slow. Dean's dark golden eyes slightly moved. Every time his arm slashed through a person's body and harvested a life, he had a feeling of pleasure. At this moment, seeing several people besieging him, he suddenly changed his mind. He gave up the original plan to break them one by one. He suddenly found that these Lemeters were not at the same level as the ones he met last time. Moreover, Splitter was the legendary monster that was least afraid of group battles. It could even be said that Splitter was a monster that was born for group battles. The more it was in the midst of thousands of troops, the more destructive it could be. Puff, puff. Dean's tail rotated rapidly. The structure of his tail was extremely special. Each section could expand and fluff into a ferocious, sharp blade cluster. At this moment, the 4 people who surrounded him fell to the ground. They didn't even have time to scream. Their injuries were terrible. Their faces were blurred. From the neck to the upper half of the chest, they were all broken. It was as if they had been repeatedly cut by a sharp blade countless times. Dean bent his knees and rushed out. In an instant, he rushed to the front of the person who was ready to escape. He hugged the person with both hands. To be precise, he stabbed the person from the back and came out through the chest. No, don't. Another person saw Dean turn his head. He was scared out of his wits. He trembled and knelt down to beg. He had seen that he absolutely couldn't escape from Dean's speed. Dean swung his arm and cut off his head. He didn't hesitate even though he was begging. He looked at the body on the ground and felt the boiling excitement in his mind getting stronger and stronger. There was an extremely comfortable feeling in his heart and a little surprise. He didn't expect his strength to be so strong. Among the 8 people he had observed before, 5 of them showed the heat responses of high-level frontiersmen, but they still had no power to fight back in his hands. With my current strength, I should be able to fight with ordinary pioneers. Unless I meet someone at the level of the god of war, it will be difficult. Dean thought in his heart. He stepped on the door on the ground and entered the research institute below. Although the previous fight was short, it still alarmed the guards below. When Dean went down the stairs, he happened to meet several guards who came up to check the situation. He immediately took action and killed them. When Dean came to the laboratory on the first underground floor, he saw that some people were still doing experiments in the laboratory. They didn't notice the disturbance outside. Some people opened the door and came out of the laboratory, asking the guards what happened. With the experience of the last looting, Dean was more familiar this time. He beheaded all the guards. As for the experimenters, he let them escape. An hour later, Dean was carrying a storage bag that was more than 3 meters high. He was escorting a middle-aged man who was wearing glasses out of the Monster Research Institute. The middle-aged man was called Siam Manson. He was the director of the Monster Research Institute. He was also a doctor here. There were 2 doctors in the institute. The other one was invited by the nobles to attend the banquet. "Hurry up," Dean whispered. "It's not that I'm slow, it's that you're too fast," Siam Manson said with a wry smile and trotted a few steps forward. Dean took him to the edge of the woods and shook the bell to let Aisha follow him. Then he continued to move forward through the woods to the street outside. Siam Manson said as he walked, "I heard that the Monster Research Institute in Carmen City was attacked not long ago. That person must be you. Who are you? How dare you go against our Monster Research Institute again and again? Do you know how dangerous it is? Do you know Poland? You will see him later, Dean said. Let him tell you what to do. He will teach you what to do. Xia Manson was surprised. Poland is still alive? You are also alive. I know. There was no communication along the way. Dean went back along the original road and walked through several streets. Suddenly, a red dot was reflected in his eyes. His pupils shrank and he looked up. The red dot was flying from the distant sky and was rushing here. Its body exuded amazing heat. It was as powerful as the pioneers he saw in the Dragon Wasteland. Support? He came so soon? Dean was surprised. But at this moment, the figure flew over without the slightest intention of slowing down. It flew straight over the heads of the three people and flew into the distance. Dean was startled for a moment. It seemed that this person didn't come for Xia Manson. It seemed that he was in a hurry and didn't notice them. He had practiced the dragon blood technique to keep the heat in his body low and hard to detect. Xia Manson had an ordinary physique, so it was even more insignificant. Needless to say, there was no heat fluctuation in Aisha's body. Xia Manson looked at the figure flying away. The excitement in his eyes turned sluggish. He couldn't help but stamp his feet. He was so angry that he wanted to curse. Dean glanced at him and said, "It seems that this person is in a hurry. You are destined to fall into my hands." Xia Manson held back the anger on his face and pretended to be calm. "It's nothing." Looking at his direction, he should be rushing to Baron Angeli's castle. Something must have happened there. Instead of saving me here, it's better to save more people. Dean frowned. Baron Angeli? He suddenly thought of the old man and the little girl he met before. It seemed that they were also going to take refuge there. Was it not safe there? Wait, the people who rushed there were pioneers. Did it mean that there were undeads with the combat power of the pioneers there? Was it Eleanor who was thrown back to the inner wall by him? Thinking of this, the appearance of the old man and the little girl flashed in his mind. The reason why he thought of them was not because he was worried about their safety, but because what he was going to do was likely to sacrifice the two people who had just helped him. The first thing he thought of when he thought that Eleanor might appear there was to stop the pioneers. For him, the number of pioneers was very small, so he could protect one at a time. The real main force in the inner wall was to rely on the frontiers and pioneers' undeads. But in this way, if he helped Eleanor, it was equal to sacrificing all the people in Baron Angeli's castle. The plan can't be messed up. He slightly closed his eyes and abandoned the picture in his mind. He turned to look at Aisha next to him. He took a deep breath and said to Xia Manson in a cold voice, "Lead the way to Baron Angeli's castle." "Go there? Why?" Xia Manson was surprised. It was the complete opposite direction. Chapter 721. Dean lifted Xia Manson with one hand and asked him to show him the way. Then he chased along the street at full speed. It didn't take long for him to see the pioneer in front of him. The heat surging in his body was as hot as a fireball, extremely conspicuous in the dark night sky. Dean also knew that Xia Manson did not blindly show him the way. He slowed down a little to avoid alerting the enemy, and followed far behind. 4 or 5 minutes later, Dean saw a group of faint red lights behind the dark street building in front of him. It seemed that a large group of ordinary people had gathered together. He jumped to the top of a building on the street and immediately saw the situation in front of him. It was a huge castle, with towering walls built outside the castle. At the moment, a few candles were lit on it, and a large number of figures gathered on the walls. On the spacious street in front of him, a large number of undeads gathered and swayed toward the huge castle. Dean could faintly hear chaotic shouts coming from the castle. Obviously, there was a fierce battle with the group of undeads, and the shouts attracted more undeads there. Bang! While he was looking, Suddenly a loud noise came from thousands of meters away on the east side of the castle. Dean was surprised and turned his head to look. Suddenly, he saw a group of extremely dense blazing figures appeared at the location of the loud noise. Looking at his movements, it seemed that he was fighting fiercely with something. Dean immediately thought of Eleanor, who had turned into an undead. At this time, the pioneer flying in the air quickly landed, ignoring the struggling castle, but rushed to the east side of the battle. Roar! Dean heard a roar, which was extremely ferocious and harsh, as if the vocal cords were broken. He couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. He saw a 3-story pointed building suddenly burst, and a black figure covered in rags rushed out from it. His hair was disheveled, and he looked like a demon. 2 other blazing figures followed him and attacked crazily. There are not many pioneers who can fly. This reinforcement is most likely from the Winged Demon clan. I'm afraid he has extraordinary skills. Dean's eyes flashed, and he was a little worried. After all, it was 1 against 2. Although the strength of the undead would soar several times after turning into an undead, it was inevitable that he would suffer losses if he lost consciousness and the battle was chaotic. He didn't want to lose a pioneer-level undead that he had sent in with great difficulty. He quickly made a decision and left Xia Manson behind. He said coldly, "You wait here. You'd better not try to escape." Xia Manson also noticed the intense battle in front of Baron Angeli's castle. The zombies on the street seemed to be guided by something, and they all rushed over. The situation wasn't looking good. At this moment, seeing that Dean had spared no effort to help, he suddenly thought of many things, including Dean's identity, which seemed to be traceable. At this moment, seeing Dudien's explanation, he quickly said, "No, I won't run around blindly. There are undeads around. If I accidentally bump into one, then I'll be better off dead than alive." Dean sneered, raised his hand to grab his ankle, and overturned him to the ground. His hands pressed down on his knee and shook it slightly. Click. Under the observation of the X-ray vision, Dean's knee had been dislocated. He did the same and dislocated the other leg. He believed that with Xia Manson's ability, there should be no way for him to recover by himself. Xia Manson almost screamed in pain. Fortunately, Dean's action was quick, and the pain soon disappeared. He said to Xia Manson, who was sitting on the ground, "Be honest. She will look after you here." After that, he quickly jumped down from the building and ran along the street. He didn't intend to take Aisha with him. Judging from the intensity of the heat source, the 2 pioneers were inferior to Hiro and Ronan, who he had seen before. They should be ordinary pioneers. He was not worried that he was wrong. At this moment, in the fierce battle, the 2 should not have the mind to hide their strength, so the heat in their bodies should be the most real. He was confident that with his current strength, it was enough to compete with ordinary pioneers. Roar! The undeads on the street saw Dean running at high speed and were immediately attracted by him. Although Dean had undead powder on his body, his movement was too big and successfully attracted the attention of the undeads. Dean ignored them and ran all the way. Soon, he got rid of the undeads. As for those who blocked the way, they were directly thrown to the side of the street by his palm. Their skulls were bent, but they were still roaring. Soon, Dean arrived at the battle circle. He didn't immediately join the battle, but first observed the situation. He immediately found that the undeads fighting with the 2 pioneers were not Eleanor, but a middle-aged male undead. He looked ferocious, with more than a dozen spikes of different lengths protruding from his back. His hair stood up like steel needles, and there were several strange short arms under his armpits. His eyes were glowing with green light, and he kept roaring. In addition to his head, more than 90% of his body was demonized. The 2 pioneers also entered the demonic state to fight. At first glance, it looked like 3 humanoid monsters fighting together. Among them, the flying pioneer had a pair of giant black wings on his back. The wings were 14 or 15 meters long, and the demonic body was more than 3 meters high. His whole body was protruding with skeleton-like bones. It was hard to tell whether it was a strange armor or a demonic body. The other one was a woman, but her hair was like a sharp knife divided into two sides. Dark silver scales covered her whole body, including small scales on her plump chest. There was a strange mouth on her abdomen, revealing slender, sharp teeth. The appearance of the two alone was enough to scare a lot of civilians to death. At this moment, the two joined forces to outflank the middle-aged undeads, forcing the middle-aged undeads to retreat. The two obviously knew the weakness of the undeads, so they cooperated so well that the middle-aged undeads didn't know which one to attack and was completely led by the nose. When the middle-aged undeads rushed to the Wing's Pioneer, the silver-scaled woman attacked his legs. As for his back, which was full of spikes, there was no way to attack. Dean watched for a while and found that the middle-aged undeads were much faster than the two of them. However, the two of them were very clever. Although they were caught, they could always escape. Especially the Wing's Pioneer, when he couldn't retreat, he flew into the air with the help of his giant wings, leaving the middle-aged undeads standing on the ground and roaring helplessly. Under the two's attacks, the middle-aged undeads had been seriously injured. Although it had no pain, its body would still be affected by the injury. Roar! Roar! The middle-aged undeads roared angrily with thick ink-like blood flowing out of his body. Once again, he caught up with the Wing's Pioneer, and his beast-like claws pounced on the Wing's Pioneer's shoulder. The Wing's Pioneer's face changed. He hurriedly flapped his wings, rolling up the sand on the ground. His body rose into the air and stepped on the undead's chest. With the help of the force, he flew backward and jumped into the sky. The middle-aged male corpse missed his target and almost fell to the ground. Looking at the pioneer of the wing race flying in the air, he roared to the sky as if he was unable to restrain his anger. All of a sudden, the spikes on his back changed. They grew again and the spikes merged together in 2s and 3s. After a while, the spikes turned into a pair of skeleton-like hideous wings. The wings were extremely ugly, short and asymmetrical. However, as the middle-aged undeads roared, they flapped and drove his body to fly. The silver-scaled woman, who was about to attack the back of the middle-aged undeads, was shocked by the sudden change and didn't attack. When the middle-aged undeads flew up, she realized that she had missed the perfect opportunity to attack. Annoyed, she stamped her feet and jumped up, continuing to attack the middle-aged undeads flying in the air. The middle-aged undeads seemed to be flying for the first time. He was unstable and flew slowly. Seeing this, the Wing's Pioneer immediately swooped down, waved a spine-like long whip in his hand, and hit the chest of the middle-aged undeads, knocking him down. Chapter 722. The virus has the ability to make life evolve rapidly, greatly shortening the normal evolutionary process. The theory of evolution was common knowledge in the old era, but not many people really understood it. Darwin's theory of evolution was gradually perfected. It was more appropriate to call it the theory of evolution. Species evolved according to the environment, but the process was slow. The reason was that life was too complex. Even a very small life, or even a small organ of the human body, had a complex structure. Even in the old era of science and technology, it was impossible to create a human organ from scratch. The only way to replace it was through transplantation. Seeing the change of the middle-aged man, he could not help but think of Aisha. Would she still maintain her human appearance when she was in danger in the future? Would the demonic factors in her body be stimulated, mutate into another appearance, and never return to her original appearance? Thinking of this, he suddenly felt lucky that he did not put her in danger before. In the future, he would never put her in a desperate situation again. While he was lost in his thoughts, the situation of the battle in front of him had been reversed. The middle-aged male corpse and the ugly wings that had just mutated forced the silver-scaled woman and the youth of the Wing tribe to retreat. In a short period of battle, It had gradually mastered the use of the wings. With the help of the wings, its speed increased again, and it was getting faster and faster. A blood-curdling scream was heard as the middle-aged man pounced on the silver-scaled woman. She couldn't dodge in time and was accidentally bitten on her arm. She was greatly shocked and didn't hesitate to cut off the bitten arm with her sword. The arm was covered with silver scales and strange thorns. When the sharp sword cut down, the scales retracted into the arm, revealing a snow-white slender arm. There was a bite mark on it. The sword light flashed, and the arm was cut off. The next moment, the silver scales gushed out and covered the broken arm, stopping the bleeding. The middle-aged man roared and rushed again. At this time, the youth saw that the situation was not good. He hurriedly swooped down and grabbed the back of the middle-aged man's neck with two eagle-like palms. He tore off a piece of flesh, but failed to tear off the head. The middle-aged man didn't care. He roared and pounced on the silver-scaled woman. He opened his mouth and bit on the plump part of her chest. Sharp teeth as thick as fingers protruded out of his mouth and easily pierced through the silver scales on her chest. The silver-scaled woman screamed in pain and raised her hand to slap him, but she could not push him away. Seeing this scene, the pioneer of the wing race turned pale and knew that she was doomed. She was bitten so close to her heart that it was hard to save her even if she cut off this piece of flesh immediately. He stared at the middle-aged man's corpse that was crazily biting the silver-scaled woman's body. He stood in the air for a while, and then suddenly came to his senses. He flapped his wings, turned around, and ran away. He knew that he couldn't kill the male corpse on his own. Staying here would only be a waste of time. It was better to report to his superiors as soon as possible. When he was about to turn around and leave, Dean had recovered. His eyes flashed, and he immediately stepped forward. He entered the demon body and flew into the air. The opponent was a pioneer, so he did not dare to hold back. Seeing Dean suddenly jump out, the Wing family pioneer was startled. When he saw Dean was a human being, he was relieved. The next moment, he sensed the heat intensity in Dean's body, which was extremely vigorous and not inferior to his. He could not help but be overjoyed and hurriedly said, "Are you from the monastery? Or from the military? Let's work together to kill it while it's not on guard." Dean nodded, "Okay." He turned his dark golden pupils and fell on the middle-aged man's corpse, exuding an amazing killing intent, firmly locking it. With the help, the Wing family pioneer's confidence doubled. It would be the best if he could kill the male corpse on the spot. Because once he left, it would be fine if the silver-scaled woman was devoured. If she was not completely dead, she would be a pioneer-level walking corpse. Such a potential danger must be eliminated while she still retained her human consciousness. Kill! With a roar, he turned around and flew out with his spear. His giant black wings danced like a rotating giant cone, rushing straight to the male corpse. Dean followed him closely, raising the sharp blade on his tail. At the same time, several monstrous limbs on his back also stood up like a peacock spreading its tail. His speed suddenly increased, catching up with the Wing family pioneer in front of him. What? The Wing family pioneer felt something wrong. He turned his head and suddenly found that Dean was looking at him with killing intent. He was shocked and then angry. Dean didn't say much. The sharp blade on his tail suddenly pierced through the pioneer's wings. With a slight twist, a large number of feathers fell. At the same time, the monstrous limbs on his back extended and shot out like several hidden spears, piercing a few holes in the pioneer's wings. The Wing family pioneer turned back and stabbed Dean's face with his spear, forcing Dean to retreat. At the same time, he turned to face Dean. His whole body was alert, and his eyes flashed with amazing coldness. "Who are you?" "A man." Dean rushed again, not giving him a chance to breathe. He thought his sneak attack could succeed, but he didn't expect to be detected by the pioneer. The pioneer was really not so easy to deal with. The Wing family pioneer roared angrily, his golden hair flying. He waved his spear like thousands of arrows, as fast as shadows, but extremely real, covering all parts of Dean's body. Dean was shocked in his heart. Unable to see through the flaws of the pioneer's attack, he suddenly wanted to retreat. But the Wing family pioneer seemed to see through Dean's plan. He suddenly stabbed his spear toward Dean's throat. It was too late for Dean to retreat. His heart was full of cold sweat. His sharp limbs and long tail all swung out, and with several clanging sounds, the long spear was knocked away in the chaos, and the danger was averted. The Wing family pioneer retreated a few feet. His face was ugly. Cracks appeared on the back of his hand, which was holding the spear, and blood oozed out. After repelling him, Dean breathed a sigh of relief. The next moment, he noticed the injury on the pioneer's claw. He was stunned. Suddenly, it occurred to him that although his fighting ability was not as good as the pioneer's, his strength and speed were faster than the pioneer's. It was just that he lacked experience. Facing the previous gorgeous spear, it was difficult for him to think of a way to break it. But now, in retrospect, it was not difficult to resolve this spear. He just needed to regard any spear as a real spear, ignore the others, and only parry one. In this way, the rest of the phantoms would naturally collapse. This method was simple, but it was difficult to make instinctive judgments in a fight between minutes and seconds. After all, he had too little experience. At the same time, it showed that this spear was really good. Like a peacock spreading its tail, it was full of momentum, enough to deter the enemy and make their judgment slow. You have your strengths and I have mine. Let me use my strengths to attack your weaknesses. Dean's eyes were full of killing intent. He suddenly rushed out again, still attacking in a frontal manner. The Wing family pioneer snorted, shook his spear, and attacked Dean again. But this time, he didn't use the phantom-like spear technique, but a simple and direct spear, like a dragon going out of the sea, carrying a tremendous momentum. Dean narrowed his eyes and suddenly made a move. His scythe-like arm cut the spearhead obliquely, and his body leaned sideways, so that the somewhat slanted trajectory of the spear crossed his shoulder. At the same time, the sharp blade limbs and the pointed tail on his back suddenly stabbed out, entangling the pioneer like a viper. With the help of many years of carving practice, he was multitasking. His attack was swift and fierce, like a man-eating flower that suddenly opened, showing its fangs, and surrounded the Wing family pioneer. The Wing family pioneer's face changed. He suddenly changed his hand to hold the spear, which was moving rapidly. Then he swung the spear, and with two clangs, he blocked the two sharp blade limbs. But it was too sudden. His arm was scratched by another sharp blade limb, and a huge wound appeared in an instant. The dark hard shell covering the surface of his arm seemed to be useless. Chapter 7:23. After a successful attack, Dean immediately followed up. His movements were extremely strange. He crawled or leaped, quickly approaching the Wing family pioneer. He swung his tail to stab the pioneer's waist from the side. At the same time, several sharp blade-like limbs on his back attacked from the other side. The Wing family pioneer's face changed, and he immediately waved his spear to resist. Although he only had one arm, the spear shaft danced in his palm like a pen, skillfully controlling it. Just as he blocked the blade-like limbs and the pointed tail on both sides, Dean suddenly reached out his hand to stab. His arms were like two sabers, and his fingertips crossed the pioneer's chest, leaving a bloodstain. The Wing family pioneer's face changed. He hurriedly flapped his wings, rolling up the sand on the ground to affect Dean's sight, and to pull away. He glanced at his scratched arm and found that the blood kept flowing, and the wound showed no sign of healing. He was shocked. If he was cut by a sword, it could be healed in a blink of an eye. The demonic body could be reconstructed repeatedly, so he was not afraid of injury. However, at this moment, the demonic body covering his arm was not reconstructed and glued. He noticed that the shape of the wound was unusual. It seemed to be a very subtle sawtooth. He looked up at Dean's waving limbs. All of them were as sharp as knives, and the edges were smooth. There was not the slightest serrated shape. However, the damaged tissue was not fake. Damn it! He bitterly glanced at Dean. He could not tell what kind of demonic mark it was from this weird demonic body. He suppressed his killing intent, no longer fighting, and turned to fly away. How could Dean let him go? He immediately jumped to chase. The Wing family pioneer's huge wings were pierced by Dean's sneak attack, and his flying speed was greatly reduced. Dean soon caught up with him. Dean immediately activated the dragon blood magic. His heart was pounding, and his blood was surging like a river. His whole body felt red and swollen, full of exuberant energy and wild power. He roared and waved his arms to attack the pioneer of the Wings race. The Wing family pioneer was shocked, and hurriedly turned around to block with his spear. Dean ignored his spear and pounced on his wings. Puff! His hands slashed on the wings, cutting 2 horrible wounds and blood spilled. Bastard! The Wing race pioneer was furious. He stopped running and turned around to stab with his spear. Dudien's eyes were cold as he met the spear head-on. He waved his arm to block the spear. The black liquid covering his scythe arm suddenly faded, revealing a pale and slender palm. He grabbed one of the wings of the scythe. Get down! Dean roared and swung his arm down. The Wing family pioneer's giant wings were restrained, and he fell down uncontrollably. Before he fell, he retracted his spear again and stabbed at Dean's chest angrily. Ding! The tip of the spear seemed to stab a metal plate. Dean's body was pushed back, and the Wing family pioneer fell even faster. Boom! He fell heavily on the ground, and his giant wings landed at the same time, setting off a lot of dust. In the dust, the Wing family pioneer slowly climbed up from the ground, gasping for breath. He stood up with his spear and flapped his giant wings, sweeping away the dust in front of him. He looked up at Dean in the air with killing intent in his eyes. But the next moment, his face suddenly changed. He looked down in horror and saw a ferocious burly figure standing in front of him. The demon-like mouth was full of blood, which was still dripping. It was the male corpse. The pioneer of the Wing race's face became stiff. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the silver-scaled woman's body had been bitten into a bloody mess. Her chest was gone and her abdomen was torn open. Her organs were scattered on the ground. It was extremely bloody. No! He suddenly came to his senses and instantly flapped his giant wings to retreat. At this moment of life and death, he erupted with unprecedented speed and power. The giant wings that were already riddled with scars flapped crazily, propelling his body to shoot into the sky like an arrow leaving the bow. Looking at the male corpse on the ground, before he had time to breathe a sigh of relief, he suddenly heard a buzzing sound. He looked up in horror, only to see Dean appear above his head, and when he looked at him, he was greeted by several sharp monster limbs whipping. Puff, puff, 2 sounds of flesh and blood tearing rang out. His body fell to the ground again like an angel with broken wings. The male corpse smelled the tempting smell of blood and couldn't wait to chase him. When the Wing family pioneer fell to the ground, the male corpse rushed to him and threw him to the ground. In the rising dust, the Wing family pioneer's screams came out. Dean frowned slightly and turned back. Before leaving, he glanced at the silver-scaled woman and found that her head was still intact. Although her beautiful cheeks were a bit blurred, the bridge of her nose was bitten off, and the left side of her face was bitten off. Her brain was not damaged. Although her neck was seriously injured, it was not broken. It seemed that she would wake up again sooner or later. His figure quietly flew away in the night and returned to Aisha's side. Xia Manson sat on the ground. Seeing Dean's ferocious figure, he was scared and instinctively shrank back. Dean glanced at Baron Angeli's castle in front of him. The flames of war were spreading and more undeads were gathering. Obviously, there was no strong person who could clean up the undeads there. The 2 pioneers who came to help were also dead. Everyone sheltered in this castle would also die tonight. In his mind, he could almost see the faces of those desperate people hugging each other, as well as their tearful eyes. They thought they had found a shelter, but the shelter had been destroyed, and this peaceful place had immediately become the bloodiest hell. He thought of that elder and little girl, especially the little girl's bright black eyes, raising her head to look at him, indescribably cute. However, in the end it was also going to be destroyed, just like a pure lily devoured by flames. After a moment, he felt the movement of the male corpse in the distance. He didn't stay any longer. He picked up Xia Manson and shook the bell to let Aisha follow him. Then he turned around and jumped off the building. He quickly left along the messy street. Xia Manson, who was in Dean's hand, said in astonishment, "Didn't you come to help? The situation there should be very bad. The longer they fight, the more undeads will be attracted. Aren't you going to help them clean up these undeads? With your strength, it should be very easy to solve it, right?" Dean indifferently said, "I have helped them." Helped? Xia Manson was at a loss. Chapter 724. Noyce didn't sleep all night as he was waiting in the square. He greeted Dean when he saw him. Dean threw Xia Manson to him. "Give him to Poland. Let Poland teach him how to do it." "Yes, young master." Noyce saw Xia Manson's clothes and knew that he was the same as Poland. He asked, "Master, is everything going well?" "Yes," Dean said. "It's getting late. You should go and rest." "Yes, young master." Dean entered the temple with Aisha. He took out the god's marrows and injected 3 tubes into himself. His body felt saturated and swollen. He put away the rest of the god's marrows and closed the temple. He went back to his bed and closed his eyes to rest. Aisha quietly sat on his bedside while he slept. Her pure black eyes were faintly staring at the dark hall. Dean woke up the next day and enjoyed his breakfast. He chewed and swallowed as he listened to the news from Barton. The outer wall had gradually calmed down. The barbarians had secretly settled in the slums. Although the news had been leaked out many times, but the Dark Parliament and the military had blocked the news. Civilians didn't know about the changes in the barbarians and didn't care about it. In addition, the military had been reorganized by Richelieu and had become the #1 legion of the Holy Church. In addition, the Knights' Hall, magistrate, nobles and other forces were gradually integrated under the double infiltration of the Dark Parliament and the Holy Church. It was only a matter of time before they were completely unified. There were many small episodes in addition to these big problems. "Arson from the Temple of Elements wants to see you and exchange knowledge with you." Barton looked at Dean. "In my opinion, he should want to stay by my side." Dean nodded slightly as he heard the old man's thoughts. Although he didn't elaborate, but he had a little impression of the old man. He was one of the few people in the temple who had offended him. Most of them were jealous that Dean had been living in the temple for a long time, so they wanted to get a piece of the pie. After all, the honor of accompanying the Pope was enough to make people envious. Moreover, they could get endless benefits. "If he wants to talk again, let Edward do it," Dudian said. The Masters of Temple of Elements were insignificant in his eyes, but it was good to use them as whetstones for Edward. "All right." Barton understood Dudian's meaning. "Edward is too young. Can he deal with him? After all, Arson is a master." "What master? I'm just someone who knows a little." Dean was very relieved. Heroes don't care about their age. Some people treat a year as a day, some people treat a day as a year. The only difference that can be brought by age is the face of marriage and childbirth, as well as the body's condition after aging. The rest is just the idea of not growing up. Barton scratched his head. "I got it." Dudian asked, "Is there any trace of the person who left us in the outer wall?" The preacher who claimed to be from the monastery in the inner wall? Barton said, "This person is strange. He didn't go back to the inner wall after he left. Instead, he went to various entertainment venues. He has been drinking in different pubs for the past few days. Someone threw him out of the pubs. I have sent people to keep an eye on him." Dean was surprised. He thought for a moment and said, "Don't disturb him. Let him be." "Yes." Barton nodded. After breakfast, Noyce had already woken up and reported to the temple. Dean asked him to lead the way to the dungeon. He wanted to see the two war gods. Dean came to the dungeon through the dark underground tunnel. Although he was prepared, he still felt a trace of instinctive cruelty when he saw the two war gods. Their hair was disheveled and their bodies were covered in chains. Even the slightest movement would cause the chains to jingle. The two of them emitted a strong smell of blood, and the chains wrapped around their bodies were also covered in dried blood. Their bodies were riddled with wounds and riddled with holes. Their limbs were all crippled, and they hung limply on the torture devices. Their breaths were weak and their mouths were gagged. They couldn't bite their tongues, and they couldn't die even if they wanted to. During the days of imprisonment, it was obvious that no one had bathed them. The blood caused by the daily torture washed their bodies over and over again, turning them dry and hard like beggars. "Elder." The two burly men on duty quickly stood up when they saw Noyce. They looked at Noyce nervously with a flattering and nervous expression. Noyce nodded. "Wake them up." "Yes." The two of them answered and turned around to pick up the buckets beside them. The icy cold water poured over their heads, instantly waking them up. As soon as the two of them woke up, they noticed Dean standing in front of them. They struggled violently, and their eyes revealed a crazy killing intent. They stared at Dean as if they wanted to kill him with their eyes. Dean pulled a chair and sat in front of them. "What do you think? Do you want to cooperate with me or continue to suffer here? You've suffered so much, but the military might not know of your loyalty. His Majesty Aristotle might not know either. Why do you have to suffer like this?" The two of them groaned, their faces full of anger. Dean raised his hand. Noyce asked the two burly men to take out the gags from their mouth. "You won't die a good death." Hero roared in anger. His blood-stained face was full of madness. Ronan looked at Dean. "I'll curse you forever even if I go to hell." Dean raised his eyebrows. "Are your bones so hard? You can leave here as long as you lower your head. You won't have to suffer anymore. You can sleep on a soft and comfortable bed. You will have beautiful women in your arms. Don't you think about it? F*CKU #yen%%. Hero cursed. Ronan's character was gloomy. Although he didn't speak, but he looked at Dean. Dean frowned and looked at the two burly men. "How did you take care of them?" Both of them were scared and didn't know how to answer. Noyce shouted, "I asked you to take care of them every day. Didn't you hear me?" Both of them trembled as they told how they had tortured them. Dean glanced at the props on the wall. Most of them were stained with blood. As they said, Hero and Ronan had tasted the torture tools. He shook his head. "It's just physical pain. It's nothing." Noyce saw that Dean was dissatisfied. He carefully asked, "Master, what do you mean?" "Take the cigarettes that Richelieu liked. Light 5 of them every day," Dean said. "Go to the prison and find 100 strong men. You know what to do." Noyce looked at Dean as they left the dungeon. Dean shook his head. "They are not ordinary people. They can't be subdued by intimidation. They have grievances in their hearts and can't be resolved. As long as there is an opportunity, they will never miss it. How can I let people who will throw stones at me when I am down to be free and unfettered?" Noyce agreed with Dean's style. "Master, are you going to kill them? Anyway, they have got everything they know. It's useless to keep them alive." "No, the living are more important than the dead." Dean looked at him. "You will personally supervise this matter. I want to completely destroy their faith and everything they hold on to. Don't blindly use torture. There are many things that are more unbearable than pain. Noyce saw a trace of reproach in Dean's eyes. He knew that Dean wasn't satisfied with what he told the two to take care of them. He didn't ask about the purpose but said in a serious tone, "I know, Master." Dean didn't say much. Although Noyce was one of the trustworthy people around him, but he would occasionally whip him to make Noyce feel awe and not arrogant. Time flew by. In the blink of an eye, the corpses had raged for a month. There were originally 23 cities in the inner wall. However, they were reduced to 12 in just a month. Almost half of them were destroyed. All the survivors were transported by the military to live in the cities that were cleared out. The reason why there were 12 cities was that there was an earl in each of the 12 cities. The cities in their territories were so large that they could accommodate millions of refugees. Their defenses were extremely strong. With pioneers in charge and the protection of the army, they barely suffered any losses in the chaos of corpses. Instead, they made a lot of money. Moreover, the drawings of the underground tunnels were in the hands of the Earl's General Affairs Director. Outsiders could only get some fragments of the drawings which were useless. So Dean's poisoning didn't involve the 12 Earl cities. This led to the 12 Earl cities becoming the largest concentration of refugees. These refugees weren't without wealth. There were some rich merchants, viscounts and barons among them. The plan to clean up the zombies was mainly focused on the 12 Earls' mansions, restoring the 12 cities to peace and tranquility. However, the streets were stained with blood everywhere, and it was difficult to wash them clean. The remaining 11 cities had been occupied by the undead. In addition to the undeads, there were many animals that had been bitten by the undead. All of them had mutated into bloodthirsty monsters. While the army was recovering the land, the Mystic Sect and the 3 devil families were also actively sending experts to encircle the pioneer-level undeads that appeared in various places. Once these undeads were exposed, the military would immediately put them on the wanted list, and they would even issue a sky-high bounty for them. On the Demon Dragon clan's Holy Maiden Peak, Hathaway was practicing her spear arts with a giant spear in the square. She was swinging her spear as she listened to the important news reported by the female officer beside her. At this time, a figure came from outside the square. It was the pale-faced middle-aged man. Chapter 726. She finally decided to let me guard the wasteland? Hathaway shook her arm as she put the spear on the ground. She looked at the middle-aged man. Did Dragon Mother find a target for me to go to the kingdom of God? She has found a suitable target since she let you guard the wasteland. Oh. Hathaway smiled softly and said, "In the heart of our grandmother Dragon Mother, everything is for the sake of the overall situation. She wouldn't have let you live until now if she didn't." The pale-faced middle-aged man was very direct. "It's not that easy to guard the wasteland. You've seen it the last time you went there. In the depths of the Red Wasteland, terrifying monsters can jump out at any time and attack the stronghold. You have to fight and defend that place. Survival there depends entirely on luck. No matter how strong you are, it's meaningless." Hathaway didn't care and said, "Since it depends on luck, then there's nothing to worry about. It's useless to worry anyway." The middle-aged man was speechless. "I have told Dragon Mother about the corpses. It is absolutely the little devil from the outer wall." Hathaway turned the topic back to the middle-aged man. "I sent Eleanor to the outer wall and she became an undead. I don't believe that she was bitten by other undead. The number of pioneer-level undead is small, and she has been missing for so long. I think it is likely that she spread the virus. It is obvious. I don't know why Dragon Mother doesn't believe it. Didn't the military send 2 military gods to the outer wall? They have been missing for so long. Isn't it enough to explain the problem? This virus is clearly the work of the outer wall. It's the fault of the inner wall. We have no time to take care of them. This must be the idea of that stinky brat. He's very black and will do anything. However, my sister actually agreed to it. I've really underestimated her." The middle-aged man shook his head. It is not certain whether that person is your sister or not. As for the virus, Dragon Mother should have her own considerations. The inner wall is in chaos. Although the monastery, the military and the devil families have tried to encircle the undead, but no one knows who is behind the virus. Aristotle has gone to the kingdom of God. It is a sensitive period. Even if Dragon Mother has evidence that the virus came from the outer wall, she won't easily take it out. Hathaway showed a contemptuous smile. Because of this, we humans are still living in the giant wall after hundreds of years. We can't go out of the wall. Such a wall exists in everyone's heart. The middle-aged man sighed. People inside the wall are eager to go out and people outside the wall are eager to come in. They build a wall in their heart to protect themselves but at the same time imprison themselves. But they can't blame anyone. The outside world is too dangerous. If we leave the giant wall, then we won't even have a home. Hathaway's eyes flashed. If I become an abyss walker, then I can go to the world outside the giant wall. There is no place that can stop me. The middle-aged man looked at her and shook his head. This is too far away. We don't have the formula of the abyss in the giant wall. If you want to become an abyss walker, then it is almost impossible unless your bloodline has awakened to the 7th degree. Hathaway disagreed. 7 degree is 7 degree. Sooner or later I will reach it. The middle-aged man smiled but didn't refute her. He knew that even if Aisha had awakened once since birth, she may not be able to complete the 7th awakening in her lifetime. One must know that the ancestor of the dragon clan who had awakened the 6th awakening was even more enchanting. Not only had he awakened when he was 10 years old, but he had already awakened the 3rd time. But for the rest of his life, he could barely reach the 6th awakening. He couldn't go any further. This time, it's a good opportunity to encircle the pioneer-level walking dead. Hathaway said thoughtfully. They don't care about the outer wall. But they don't know that there is a sinister little devil there. I will never let him succeed. He wants to take advantage of the chaos in the inner wall to get a chance to breathe. Humph. He underestimates me too much. The middle-aged man frowned. Miss, what are you going to do? To encircle the undead. But, they didn't say where they are going to encircle the undead. Besides, if the undead runs to the outer wall, then we have to do our duty and chase after it so that it doesn't harm the innocent civilians of the outer wall. In the depths of the Dragon Clan's main peak, there was a cave similar to a natural karst cave. The walls were red and filled with heat waves. The temperature in the air was extremely high. The inner side of the rock wall was like a living creature's skin. It was densely covered with red veins. Bright red liquid like magma flowed slowly into the ground and converged into the huge rock pool in the center of the cave. In the monotonous rock pool, there was a snow-white color. It was a beautiful woman with creamy skin. She wore a bright golden laurel crown, looking graceful and graceful. She quietly closed her eyes and sank into the rock pool. White mist curled around her, covering her face and making it faintly discernible. At this time, an old woman came from the dark tunnel outside the cave with a lantern. She stopped outside the rock pool. Her withered white hair curled in the heat wave. Sweat oozed from her forehead and evaporated immediately. She respectfully said, Miss, there is a reply. The person in the outer wall is indeed Miss Aisha. But her state seems to be a bit wrong. It is suspected that she has been infected with a virus and has become an undead. The beautiful woman in the rock pool opened her eyes slightly, revealing a pair of eyes that were as tranquil and deep as a lake. She slowly said, Did he go to see it himself? Yes. The old woman lowered her head. Kirajin also said that Miss Aisha seems to be under someone's control. She listens to a youth. But the youth is very polite and respectful to Miss Aisha. The beautiful woman's eyes were as calm as the lake. Let Kirajin kill him and bring Aisha back. The old woman's face turned strange. Miss, Kirajin also said that he can't assassinate the youth if you want him to. He said that his strength is low and he may not be able to kill the youth. Instead, he will behead the youth before Miss Aisha can react. The beautiful woman frowned. He is ranked third on the assassin list. Can't he kill a youth? The old woman smiled. I also asked him. He said that the youth's strength is close to the top 10 military god. Moreover, he is very cautious. Apart from Miss Aisha, even his most trusted subordinates can't take the initiative to get close to him. There was a trace of fluctuation in the beautiful woman's eyes. What is the origin of this youth? Even the youngest of the 10 military gods were in their early 20s. Unless it was a genius like Aisha, who had a great background and resources, no one could reach the pinnacle of the outer wilderness in their youth. I heard from Miss Haley that this youth is the poor boy from the outer wall who caused Miss Aisha to lose her saintess position. He was born in the dust. He is the lowest class of people even in the outer wall. The old woman felt a bit strange. He became a limitless individual after he joined the Dragon Clan's Dragon Guards. I didn't expect him to become a pioneer in such a short time. Moreover, he is close to the level of the top 10 military gods. I'm afraid that there are a lot of secrets hidden in his body. There must be someone behind him. The beautiful woman's brows drooped. After a while, she said, investigate his identity. Yes, Mississippi, the old woman agreed. Seeing that she didn't say anything else, she cautiously said, Miss, since Corrigan can't do it, should we send the person ranked first on the killer list? The woman closed her eyes and moved her lips, but her voice was very calm. There is no need. Even the number 1 assassin on the list can barely assassinate the war god. He is an executioner trained by the winged race. He will not work for us. The old woman said, It seems that we have to send a real master. We will discuss this matter later. The beautiful woman didn't want to say more. The old woman realized that the beautiful woman didn't have the intention to kill for the time being. It seemed that the beautiful woman intended to investigate the youth's background first. The old woman immediately retreated and prepared to leave this hot place as soon as possible. Outer wall, St. Mark's Square. A big and a small figure were flashing in the square. They collided with each other from time to time. Their hands were holding 2 wooden swords. Dean was holding 2 wooden swords in his hands. He fiercely hacked the slender figure. The girl was Aurora. After a month of training, Riley had taught her a lot of swordsmanship. After the injection of God's blessing, her physique was already at the level of primary hunter. This was not because Dean was saving resources. If he wanted to, he could even train her to the level of limitless within this month. But too high a physique was not a good thing, especially for the initial fighting training. Just the basic skills needed repeated practice. The real training of basic skills, in addition to correcting the posture of the body, was more important to train the willpower. The stronger the body, the more difficult it was to train the willpower. Training hard when one's physique was weak would instead temper one's willpower, making it as tenacious as steel. In addition, there was another reason. If there was no parasitic soul worm, relying on God's blessing alone could only improve the body to the level of hunter. Clang! The wooden sword in Aurora's hand was knocked away. Her wrist that was holding the sword was red. Aurora's face turned ugly as she saw the wooden sword fly away. She bit her lower lip and went forward to pick up the wooden sword. She used her red and swollen hand to grasp the sword. She turned to look at Dean. Dean put away the 2 swords and took the towel from Noyce. He wiped his sweat. Let Riley accompany you to practice more. I'll tell him that you don't need to be merciful. Aurora slightly bit her teeth as she clenched the wooden sword in her hand. She lowered her head and didn't speak. Dean looked at her but didn't comfort her. He just shook his head and went back to the temple. Today he was interested in testing Aurora's level. The results surprised him. Although he was disappointed in the end, but he was very surprised in his heart. In just a month of training, Aurora's combat ability was comparable to the majority of hunters. This was an incredible thing. It was not an exaggeration to say that she was a combat genius. Such an astonishing rate of improvement made him feel a little ashamed. Thinking about all these years, even though his physique had improved by leaps and bounds, his combat ability hadn't improved that quickly. Apart from his archery skills, his close combat skills seemed a little weak. In fact, he knew that this was something he couldn't do anything about. At first he practiced archery hard and had amazing progress, but later he was imprisoned in prison. There was no environment to practice archery, so he gradually neglected it. After he was released from prison, he could only rely on his strong physique to slowly restore his archery skills to the original level. But the level was not high. It was just at the hunter level. Later he got the Dragon Clan's Dragon Thorn chapter. Most of the records were various kinds of spear skills. He practiced for a period of time and had a small progress in spear skills. He also realized his own way of spear skills. As a result, his physique had skyrocketed and he had mastered the splitter's complete body. His whole body had turned into a sharp blade. His fighting style was biased towards the sword type, so he had to practice with the sword to enhance his fighting ability. He had changed his fighting style several times, but his fighting style had become weaker. At least it couldn't be compared with other pioneers. At the time when he was helping the male corpse in the inner wall area, a winged pioneer whose physique was obviously weaker than him had struggled several times and almost let him escape. He felt that his archery skills should be one of the best in the entire inner wall area if he could change his fighting style. If he could keep practicing his spear skills, it was estimated that his spear skills could be upgraded to the pioneer level. At least it would be comparable to the Wing family's spear skills. My short life can't afford too many delays and detours. Dean sighed in his heart. Now he had decided to practice his swordsmanship to the end. He must improve his swordsmanship to the level of other pioneers. Fortunately, he had been practicing carving with his right hand for years. He had a deeper understanding of the flexibility of the body and the clever use of strength. He felt that this kind of understanding of strength was the foundation of fighting. No matter what weapon it was only the appearance. But the technique could be applied to all moves as long as he mastered the way of using different weapons. Chapter 727. Report back to the chairman. Our people have infiltrated into the cities of the 12 earls of the inner wall. According to your plan, we have secretly bribed the civilians of the inner wall to spread the rumors. At present 9 of the cities are in a mess because of the rumors. The people in the cities of the remaining 3 earls were accidentally exposed and executed. But they didn't find us, a short middle-aged man reported to Dudian. Dudian nodded. Tell them that the corpses are caused by the Monster Research Institute. The military and the monastery are the culprit. It's just a conspiracy for them to shelter the refugees. They will be secretly caught by the Monster Research Institute and dissected at any time. If necessary, let them create several experimental accidents for the people of the shelter to see. Pay attention to hide your identity. The middle-aged man was startled. Yes, Chairman. Go. Dudian waved his hand to let him leave. The middle-aged man and the people who helped him in the inner wall were elites selected from the Dark Church. Although their strength wasn't good and they were at the hunter level, but they were treacherous and cruel. They were suitable for this kind of thing. Dudian was different from others. He only focused on the character. Strength was the second criterion. Although he didn't have many confidants, but there were a lot of people who worked for him. Noyce looked at Dudian after the middle-aged man left. Master, the gunpowder made by the alchemist camp has been buried in the sighing wall. But the current amount is only enough to destroy a small gap in the wall. Tell them to hurry up and continue production. Dudian said. The Dark Church had been integrated. The 12 districts had been merged into 6 major divisions. The top alchemists of each district had formed the alchemist camp, and the potion pharmacists had formed the potion pharmacist camp. They were two sharp swords in his hand to cope with the upcoming war. Master, the saltpeter mines in our hands are almost finished. The rest of the saltpeter mines are in the hands of the nobles. Do you want to buy them from them? Nois knew that Dudian attached great importance to this matter. What if they don't agree to buy? Then let them agree. Dudian's answer was very simple. Nois understood what he meant and nodded without saying anything else. With Dean's permission, he could do whatever he wanted to do. Dudian came to the dungeon and looked at Hero and Ronan, who were shackled in chains. Both of them looked more miserable than the last time he saw them. Their bodies were naked and their armor had been stripped off. Their bodies were covered in blood. Their hair was scattered and their heads were hanging down. They looked like corpses hanging on chains. Hundreds of burly men were living in the cells next to the dungeon. They were selected from the military and Thornflower prison. More than half of them were lechers who had committed obscenities. Most of their targets were beautiful women and children. There were even some who liked old women and children. There were only a few who liked men. Dean smelled the strong stench of semen in the air as soon as he arrived at the dungeon. It was not the authentic old era cigarette, but a special kind of cigarette made of poison. It was highly addictive. Both of them had been passively infected with drug addiction for a long time. Did you take care of them today? Dudian asked. The two strong men in charge of the execution were trembling with fear. They nervously replied, Not yet. Then what are you waiting for? Both of them replied, Yes, Elder. They took out the whip from the wall and whipped the two men. The two of them were awakened and immediately screamed like frightened mice. Their eyes, covered by their messy hair, were filled with fear and pleading. Hero shouted, Don't hit me, as he screamed. The two of them whipped him again and again. Dudian quietly looked at them. After a while he raised his hand to signal them to stop. He came in front of them. What do you think? Hero's screams stopped as he heard Dean's voice. He looked up at Dean, but there was no resentment in his eyes. Instead, there was fear. Please kill me. I beg you. I'm willing to do anything you want me to do. Please kill me. Dean raised his hand to touch his hair, but found that his hair was stuck into bundles, exuding the stench of semen. He immediately retracted his hand and calmly said, If I kill you, my efforts will be in vain. Are you two willing to fight for me? I'm willing. I'm willing. Hero shouted out loud as Dudian's words fell. There was no trace of hesitation in his voice. Ronan also said, I'm willing. I'm willing to help you kill the people from the military as long as you let us leave this place. Although his expression was calm, but his words were very serious. There was a trace of urgency and desire in the depths of his eyes. Dudian didn't expect that their consciousness would be so fragile in such a short period of time. It seemed that drugs and the destruction of dignity were enough to completely destroy a person. In other words, either of the two could completely defeat a person. He had the concept that people were very fragile for a long time. Whether it was a hunter or a pioneer, their weakness was equally fatal. In that case, you will cooperate with me to complete an experiment. You will follow me from now on, Dudian said. Hero's body trembled slightly and tears flowed out. His expression looked like he was crying tears of joy, but there was also a sad and desperate feeling of self-pity. Ronan was silent and lowered his head. Dudian asked the supervisor next to him to untie their shackles and take them to wash their bodies. After a while, the two finished washing and changed into a set of clean clothes. Dudian took them to the side hall at the top of the mountain, which was also his alchemy laboratory. There were all kinds of strange materials, and the largest object was a chariot made entirely of metal in the center of the laboratory. The black body of the chariot exuded an ancient aura, and the outer edge of the chariot's wheels protruded with ferocious spikes. These spikes were of different curvatures and lengths, and if one looked closely, they would discover that these were the sharp horns of unknown monsters. The bottom of the chariot was connected to several dark ropes that hung upside down on the back of the chariot. Dudian came to the side of the chariot and asked Noise to carry Hero to the laboratory table. He put on sterile gloves and took out a scalpel. He pressed Hero's head and whispered, "It's a little painful. Bear with it." Hero was obviously scared. What are you going to do?" "It's just a small experiment." Dean took the anesthetic and injected it into Hero's back. Then he cut Hero's back. The scalpel rotated between his fingers as if he was carving a work of art. He cut Hero's back layer by layer along the fiber texture. Soon, the skin on his back was completely peeled off. The flesh was rolled up, revealing a centipede-like slender back. Dean narrowed his eyes and took the chain hanging from the chariot. With the help of the scalpel, he slowly implanted the chain and tied it to his spine. Half an hour later, the operation was completed. Hero's back had been stitched up, and the stitches on his skin were extremely neat, like clothes sewn by an excellent tailor. However, there was a chain protruding from the skin of his cervical vertebrae, and this chain penetrated deep into his flesh. Dudian grabbed the healing powder from the side and smeared it on Hero's back. He poured out 2 small red pills and put them in Hero's mouth. "Eat it." Hero hesitated but didn't dare to resist. He licked his mouth and swallowed. Hero's wounds quickly healed after taking the healing medicine. Especially the wounds on his back. It was almost visible that the skin and flesh were slowly glued together. New flesh was growing in the gap. Dudian estimated that it would take at least 3 hours for Hero's wounds to fully heal. In addition to the healing medicine made by the top potion maker, it was also due to his own self-healing ability. 3 hours passed. During this time Dean was fiddling with the chariot. The wound on Hero's back was almost healed. He removed the thread on Hero's back and let him stand up, take 2 steps. Hero tentatively walked down the experiment table. At this moment, the tendons in his feet and hands had also healed. Perhaps because he hadn't walked for too long, his walking posture was a bit rusty. Every step he took, there was a tinkling sound. Hero looked back and was stunned. The chain on his back was connected to the bottom of the chariot. He was like a horse that was tied to the chariot. "From now on, this is your nest," Dudian said to him. "Try and see if you can pull my chariot." Hero turned to look at Dudian. 2 lines of tears gushed out. He roared in grief and angrily punched the table. He roared like an angry beast and rushed towards Dudian. Dean's eyes were slightly cold. The moment he approached, he suddenly kicked out and kicked the man's chest, causing him to fly out. Although Hero was at the peak of the wilderness level, he had been imprisoned for many days and was seriously injured. At the moment his hands and feet had just regained their mobility. His strength was not as good as before. Dean stamped his feet and jumped onto the chariot. He put his hands on the metal platform and pressed one of the buttons. "Ah!" Hero screamed and twitched on the ground. He was like a fish that had jumped ashore. Dean tapped again and the button popped up. He quietly looked at Hero. "You have no choice. Unless you would rather go back to the previous days." Hero stopped twitching and gasped for breath. His hands were still trembling. He stood up shakily and looked at the youth on the chariot. His eyes were full of resentment, but there was even more fear. He shouted, "Then let me go back to the days before. I'd rather stay in the dungeon than work for you." "Didn't you say that you are willing to do anything?" Dudian lightly said. "You have to keep your words." Hero was sad and indignant. He thought that Dudian wanted him to fight for Dudian. If that was the case, then he could take the opportunity to escape back to the inner wall. But Dudian had tied him to such a chariot. It was clear that Dudian intended to enslave him forever until he died. He would rather return to those hellish, dark days and completely abandon his dignity when he thought about how he would have to risk his life for this man who he hated to the point of insanity. You devil! Hero wanted to cry but he couldn't. He was numb to the hatred in his heart. There was only regret in his heart. Why did he come to the outer wall and enter the temple? Dudian indifferently said, "The experiment has been completed. It's impossible for you to go back to the previous days. But as long as you are obedient and fight for me, then at least you can survive. If you hate me and would rather be humiliated than work for me, then I can only let you take off your clothes and pull the chariot to the inner wall. Let your loved ones, your children or your parents see what you look like. Oh yes, there is no need for that thing in your crotch to exist anymore." You. Hero was so angry that his hair almost stood up. He stared at Dean like a berserk beast, but Dean didn't care and still had an indifferent face. He wanted to kill Dudian with his eyes. If thoughts could kill, then he would have destroyed Dudian into dust. But nothing happened, even though he stared at Dudian for a long time. His eyes were drier than before. His heart was full of bitterness. The hatred slowly receded. It was like a person who couldn't maintain ecstasy for a long time. He couldn't fall into anger for a long time either. Hatred and anger were like waves. They rolled to the climax and then gradually subsided. Once again, he deeply understood what it meant to live a life worse than death. He also understood what it meant to be happy now, because there would be even worse situations in the future. He suddenly felt that the days in the dungeon were nothing. If Dean really wanted to castrate him and expose his ugliness in front of the people he loved the most, then he wouldn't have to worry about it. Accepting your fate is a kind of courage. What do you think? Dudian said. Hero lowered his head. He was so sad that he couldn't cry. He squatted on the ground. Dudian looked at Ronan, who was sitting in the corner. It's your turn. Ronan's face turned ugly. He clenched his fist. He wanted to commit suicide, but his sharp fingertips touched his neck. He was full of fear. Dean looked calm as he saw the struggle in Ronan's eyes. After a period of humiliation and torture, their willpower wasn't the same as before. They were even more fragile than ordinary people. It took courage to commit suicide. Hope was an evil thing. As long as a person saw a glimmer of hope, they would crave for that glimmer of hope even if they knew that there was a greater possibility of facing a worse situation. Chapter 728. Dean picked up Ronan and threw him to another table. Ronan did not resist. He closed his eyes in pain, still fighting a psychological battle. Dean applied anesthetics to him and took the scalpel. He skillfully cut the skin on his back. He cut layer by layer like peeling garlic. After the back was exposed, he took the chain from the tank and wrapped it around his spine. Then he began to suture. The whole process was very smooth. Hero squatted on the ground. He saw that Ronan didn't make a sound. His eyes were full of sadness. He couldn't help but sob like a wronged child. Dean wiped his hands after the operation was finished. I'll give you back your freedom, and your loved ones will be safe when I become the master of the inner wall. The two of them were silent, dejected as if they had accepted their fate. Dean left the temple and asked Noyce to send food to both of them. He didn't worry that they would resist or escape. He just hoped that they could restore their strength as soon as possible. Another day passed in the blink of an eye. Dean finished his breakfast and was about to ask about the situation of the inner wall. Noyce rushed into the temple. Master, it's not good. There is news from the observation tower that someone is coming out of the inner wall. It seems that they are coming towards us. Dean's heart turned cold. The observation tower he built could transmit the situation of the wall in real time. Each tower was equipped with the latest 10x telescope. The hunters on the observation tower had a visual range of about 5,000 meters. Although 5,000 meters couldn't be compared with the distance between the Psi Wall and Utopia Mountain. However, there weren't only one observation tower, but more than a dozen of them. It was like the beacon tower in ancient China. The observation tower would make a mark when it saw the enemy. The second observation tower would monitor the first tower and then give the information. Dean could synchronize the latest information. Since Noyce came to report to him, it meant that the people from the inner wall had passed through the side wall. What is the specific information? Dean asked. More than a month had passed. He was worried that the inner wall would react and launch a large-scale attack. According to the news, there are 12 people riding 2 giant eagles. Noyce said concisely. Dean's face changed. 12 people? Were there 12 pioneers? Get ready immediately. Activate the first-level defense plan. Dean quickly made a decision. He was not only worried about the possibility of 12 pioneers, but also that if this possibility was true, it meant that there was a strong inner Baron-level leader among the 12 pioneers, which was the biggest threat. Yes. Noyce immediately turned and ran. Dean estimated the flying speed of the eagle. He knew that they only had 3 minutes to prepare. He rushed out of the temple and went to the side hall. He took out some bottles of medicine from the cabinet. 2 of them were powder. He poured the powder on Hero and Ronan, who were leaning against the chariot. Both of them were inexplicable but soon recognized that the powder was used to cover up the smell. Hero asked, "Did someone from the inner wall come?" Dudian replied, "There are more than a dozen of them riding giant eagles. They should be people from the military." Hero and Ronan were startled. They looked at each other with a complicated expression. Dean took 2 masks from the side and threw them to both of them. "You have to help me in the fight. If it doesn't work, then we can only escape back to the temple. There is a secret passage under the temple that leads to the bottom of the mountain. I will give you a hand gesture and you will rush back to the temple with me." Both of them looked at each other but didn't make a sound. They took the headgear in their hands and slowly put it on their heads. Dean took out another bottle from the cabinet and poured out 3 purple pills. He swallowed one and threw the other 2 to Hero and Ronan. "This is the antidote." Both of them saw Dean eat it, so they didn't doubt him. Anyway, Dean could easily kill them, so they also ate it. But in their hearts, they realized that Dean would probably use poison in the next battle. Sinister boy. Both of them thought but didn't show any change in their expressions. "They are coming." Dean looked up at the sky and quickly rushed out of the side hall. Hero and Ronan followed Dean's line of sight. After a moment, they saw 2 huge shadows flying over from the horizon. Both of them were shocked. Their perception was 1 step slower than Dean's. They were at the peak of the outer wilderness. Although they weren't good at perception, they weren't inferior to the average perception-type pioneers. Thinking of this, both of them looked at the thin back of the youth standing at the door and felt a chill. This youth was more terrible than they had imagined. He didn't only know how to use tricks. Both of them didn't know that Dean didn't sense the arrival of the enemies. He calculated the time of the giant eagle's flight and they were almost there. Sure enough, there are 2 giant eagles. Dean squinted his eyes when he saw the 2 huge black spots in the sky. He knew that the information was right. There were 12 people standing on the eagles and they were probably pioneers. 12 pioneers were dispatched to kill him at the same time. What a big move. Even the Dragon Clan's fortress in the wasteland only had 7 or 8 pioneers guarding it all year round. Dean's eyes were cold and full of killing intent. He clenched his fist. He didn't expect the battle to come so soon. Moreover, it was like a thunderbolt, leaving no room for negotiation. As they got closer, Dean gradually saw the figures on the back of the giant eagles. There were exactly 12 of them, and they were emitting exuberant heat. They were all pioneers. The last glimmer of hope in his heart was dashed. The worst news was that 3 of the heat sources were stronger than the other 10 pioneers. They were comparable to Hero and Ronan. Do I have to ask her for help? Dean thought of Aisha. She was his last life-saving charm. Judging from the current situation, it wouldn't be difficult to solve this crisis if Aisha took action. However, Aisha had to enter the demonic body to deal with so many people. Once she lost control, it would be very difficult to control her. What worried him the most was that if she took action with all her strength, her body might mutate into new tissues like the male corpse, and she would never be able to return to the appearance of a human again. While these thoughts were churning in his mind, his pupils suddenly shrank. Two thick murderous auras shot out from his eyes as he stared directly at the person on the back of one of the giant eagles. This person was one of the 3 strongest heat sources. She wore a set of dark green soft armor and held a giant spear in her hand. Her face was peerlessly beautiful. It was a face that he would never forget for the rest of his life. It was also a face that he hated to the bone. Hathaway. It was her. She came in person. Dean was waiting for the right time to kill the Dragon Clan by himself. He didn't expect that she would come to the outer wall and take the initiative to come to him. He clenched his fingers so tightly that his knuckles cracked. The silent killing intent in his body burst out like a flood, causing his eyes to bulge slightly and his pupils to heat up. Every pore on his body opened up and spurted out angry hot air. Every strand of his hair seemed to be standing up and exploding. Die. 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 Chapter 729. At this time, Hathaway on the giant eagle seemed to have noticed Dean. Her watery eyes moved slightly, and she looked down at Dean, whose eyes were full of killing intent. At this moment, both of them were staring at each other, as if the space between them did not exist at all. Then, the corner of her mouth slightly curled up. The tyrannical aura in Dean's eyes instantly became strong, and the strong killing intent made his handsome face distorted. He stared at her. Whoosh, whoosh. The giant eagle flapped its wings, and the whistling sound of flying became clearer. The 2 giant eagles flew over the square in a blink of an eye, like 2 dark clouds floating over, blocking the morning sun, and reflecting 2 huge shadows on the square. The Knights of Light who were guarding outside the square looked up at this scene with their mouths wide open, dumbstruck. Barton, who had just finished his breakfast and was about to come over to greet Dean, was standing in the corridor looking at the 2 giant eagles above his head. He could even see the sharp claws below the eagles, which were as sharp as iron hooks, glowing with cold luster. 2 eagle cries sounded, and the giant eagles landed on the square. The wind rolled up and the dust swept towards Dean. Dean stared at Hathaway, who was standing on the head of the eagle, without blinking. Her appearance was exactly the same as when he first saw her. The green soft armor was her favorite color. She had a harmless smile on her face, as if she was meeting an old acquaintance. The killing intent in Dean's heart could not be contained, which made him crazy, but his brain was extraordinarily calm, so that his face still maintained an angry and ferocious expression, showing uncontrollable killing intent. Hathaway looked at Dean's appearance, covered her mouth and chuckled. "You look so fierce, are you going to eat me?" Dean gritted his teeth and said word by word, "Your meat is rotten. I will only marinate you and feed you to the dogs." "Shut up!" A young man in armor shouted from the giant eagle next to him, and he angrily rebuked Dean. "Who do you think you are? How dare you talk to Princess Hathaway like this? Do you know who she is? Kowtow to her 3 times and apologize. Otherwise, I'll make sure your head falls to the ground." Dean's eyes were gloomy as he looked at him. "Who the hell are you? Master didn't say anything, but you are shouting. You're courting death." The young man was furious. He jumped up from the giant eagle and flew over like a rock. After landing on the ground, he rushed toward Dean like a sharp sword. He put his palms behind his back, and the moment he approached, he pulled out a sword and stabbed Dean's throat. Scram! The killing intent in Dean's heart could not be suppressed. He roared and instantly erupted with anger. The bones on his arm bulged as he punched. Bang! The fist collided with the sharp sword. The sharp sword pierced the fist, and the fist followed the blade of the sword all the way forward until it hit the hilt. The anger in the young man's eyes suddenly disappeared, and there was a trace of astonishment. He found that his sword was fixed and could not move. At the same time, Dean's other fist smashed into the young man's face. Crack! The young man's long sword fell out of his hand, and his body flew upside down, smashed on the ground, slid for dozens of meters, and rolled in front of the giant eagle's claws. There was no sound. A huge hole appeared on his face, and he died on the spot. Dean had retracted his fist, and a 20-centimeter-long white bone spur protruded from his fist, slowly retracted back into his body. As for the sword in his other fist, as he loosened his fist, the sword did not pierce into his fist, but pierced through the gap between his fingers, only cutting a little bit of his arm. It was precisely because of this that he used his fingers to clamp the sword and fix it in place. The people on the giant eagle looked at the scene that happened in a flash. They did not react until the young man bumped into the eagle's claws. Seeing that he was dead, they were all dumbfounded, and their faces were full of astonishment and disbelief. This young man was a pioneer, but he was killed by a punch? For a time, the eyes of the people looking at Dean were no longer relaxed and indifferent, but revealed a dignified look. Although the young man did not use the devil body and carelessly attacked, Dean could kill him, which was enough to prove that he was also a pioneer. However, judging from the heat source on Dean's body, he was just a primary frontiersman. Hathaway was also surprised. She remembered that when she first met Dean outside the giant wall, he was just a little hunter. Later, he was sent to the dragon family to become a dragon guard and received resources to cultivate, but he was only a frontiersman. She did not expect that when they met again, Dean had become a pioneer, at the same level as her. "Your Royal Highness, is this the rebel that you said was disturbing the outer wall?" A slender woman on the giant eagle asked Hathaway. Hathaway nodded slightly. The monastery should have mentioned it. The military also knows that the outer wall has been occupied by someone who is trying to establish himself as the king. Moreover, he is related to the recent outbreak of ptomaine in the inner wall. Our dragon family has evidence that shows that he is probably the one who is controlling the ptomaine. This person must be eliminated. However, it is not that simple here. In addition to him, there should be other strong people in charge. Everyone be careful and don't underestimate the enemy. Yes, I heard that our military has sent 2 gods of war. But they haven't returned to the inner wall yet. It is estimated that they are in a bad situation. Everyone should be careful. Another burly middle-aged man said in a deep voice. There was a special cross pattern on his armor. It was the symbol of the military's armor. The rest of the people were surprised as they heard his words. They didn't expect that the 2 gods of war of the military would die here. They suddenly understood why Hathaway would invite so many pioneers to come to such a barren place like the outer wall. In addition to him, I can't feel other strong people. It should be someone who is good at hiding. A youth with burn marks on his face said. His eyes were purple and flashing with strange light. Hathaway looked around and her eyes suddenly fell on the temple. She looked at Dean. My sister is there. I can feel it. Don't let her hide. Dean stared at her coldly, but he was a little surprised in his heart. He didn't expect that she could perceive Aisha. Aisha's current state, even a pioneer who was good at perception might not be able to perceive her, just like the previous young man with a burn on his face. If you want to see, then why don't you go in and see? Are you afraid of your sister? Dean stared at her. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.